Hi, what's up, everybody? So today we're going to be doing something different for this channel. I've never done a live video review. So this is basically because Carson had asked if I could review his debate with Vegan Gains, and I said, why not? So that's what I'm doing right now. It's basically going to be like just kind of a quicker run through because it's kind of long. So we'll just be running through at 1.75 speed. I also welcome people to ask any questions here. Yeah, I think this will be good because Carson and I have a discussion coming up next week. So it'll be kind of a little bit of maybe a way to get clearer on Carson's position about some stuff. That discussion is going to be based more on the topics of like welfarism versus abolitionism. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, what's up, dude?
Hey, man, how's it going?
Yeah, so I challenged you to the debate first, right? And we're going to debate effective activism or something.
Yeah, somebody sent you a video I made about Joey Carbstrong being a bit too extreme in his activism.
Right. Okay. So if you want to debate that right now, I'm down.
Okay. I did have two other things to talk about as well. And because of a response you did to a comment in your live stream about crop deaths, I almost have more interest in a mini debate on that. But I'm going to leave it completely up to you. If you want to just do the activism one, that's cool.
It's kind of the hottest topic in animal rights right now, right? Crop death. So that'll be interesting to hear what they have to say about that too.
Cool. Well, I don't think the activism debate should last too long. I think we're like usually with topics like that, you're kind of going to get to a point where you sort of have to agree to disagree. It's just going to come down to personal preference, but we can do both if we have time.
Okay, so start with the activist one.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, my position, I don't know what you consider activism to be extreme, like what your standards are, but Joey, I wouldn't call his activism extreme at all.
Yeah, I would agree with Vegan Gains on that point. I don't think that Joey Carbstrong's activism is extreme. I think sometimes it can be theatrical when he's doing outreach, but I don't think I've seen anything from him that I would call extreme. I mean, I've seen him be confrontational, but I don't think that that it would count as like I've heard of people doing extreme activism, like taking a carcass of like a lamb and taking them out to a public square and like slitting their throat and bleeding them all over the ground in order to show the public like what animal slaughter looks like on a dead animal. Compared to that, or compared to like violent things that people do in the promotion of animal rights, I wouldn't call what Joey does extreme at all.
I would just say he's doing what you would expect somebody to do if they're arguing for the idea that animals should have inalienable rights, just like human beings have. You have to use arguments around something like name the trait, where you make comparisons between human beings and animals, because like the idea of veganism is that there just aren't enough significant differences between humans and animals where you could treat animals as different beings when it comes to laws like a right to life.
All right, so I'm not sure. Hey, what's up, Akash? Good to see you here. And yeah, Lee Dooley, if you find that the speed is too fast to understand, please let me know. But I just want to comment on this. So I think that a vegan argument doesn't necessarily require name the trait. I think it can be a useful tool. But I don't think that for every definition of veganism, you'd be required to make this like human versus non-human animal comparison. And I think in some instances it might even be counterproductive. But I'm not sure. I'm not totally sure on that. My gut reaction is just to say, like, you know, if you say that veganism is a position against animal commodification and you just apply that across the board, it doesn't seem like you'd have to. I mean, I guess if your interlocutor is arguing for a carnist position, I guess it could be useful. I'm just not convinced that it's necessary exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm glad you mentioned name the trait, because I actually used to love name the trait until I found a way around it, and I'm not a fan of it anymore. I was actually watching you debate somebody when I was inspired to think of this element. But the problem with name the trait is it bases everything on the society we live in while we have abundance. Because if we were out in nature, just living in small tribes and didn't have a society, if somebody gave birth to some extremely disabled child, you would do away with that child, and probably rightfully so. If you had too many children you couldn't feed, you would probably quickly take out that child. Now,
I'm not sure about that part. I don't know that it wouldn't be, I mean, I think it would just be possible to build it into name the trait, like to build that in and just say, in the event that you're in a survival situation, what would be the trait difference? So I think it depends on the context. Like it depends on what the person is trying to justify. I think the premises are based on that. Lee Dooley says that they were initially sold on veganism by the fact that eating meat was unnecessary and eating meat causes harm. So you are causing unnecessary harm. Yeah, it is pretty simple. For me, I think the dairy and eggs thing just kind of followed suit in the same fashion.
I'm vegan. I'm full on vegan. I think that nobody should harm animals. But I think it's not as simple as name the trait, because it comes down to we were able to protect children that were unwanted and handicapped people and all kinds of people because of our society. And now I also think that we're almost to a level where our society is so far advanced that we can protect animals and someday protect the crop death element too. I just don't think they're full on equally.
Okay, I'm not understanding the argument. You're saying, what's your argument?
Yeah, I'm not understanding that either. Carson seems to be bringing up something about marginal cases in this situation. I think Carson's appealing to kind of like historical precedent maybe, and saying that a lot of times when people will say like, for example, the carnist will say non-human animals are less intelligent, and then the vegan will say, well, there are humans who are less intelligent in society. We still afford them moral consideration. And I think what that's what Carson's kind of saying, is that we still afford moral consideration.
The argument is that it doesn't work because it has to do with how well off your society is. Because the idea
how is name the trait only relevant, or only is a good argument depending on the society?
Well, because what would you say if I named the trait of intelligence?
Well, name the trait is only testing logical consistency. It's sort of like a variation on the marginal cases argument. So I don't understand how it wouldn't apply. Like, what's logically wrong about a name the trait argument, depending on the society you're living in?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess just based purely on logic, there wouldn't be. Based on what we're able to do.
Okay, so there's no logical problem with the name trait argument. You only see, like, say, a practical one when it comes to activism?
Just a practical one when it comes to the idea of discussing how these things work. But anyway,
so can you give me like an example of a practical issue you'd run into when you're doing activism when it comes to using name the trait?
Not outside of the thing I just mentioned. Just the idea that it doesn't work on its own outside of the idea of talking about.
Okay, I just want to pause this for a sec just to answer. I want to answer Vegan Gaines' question here. So Carson said he hasn't had any issue with using it, practically speaking. What I found is that, at least with street outreach, when you're asking somebody like, why would we discriminate against non-human animals, for example, like what's the trait difference? You do kind of immediately go into a debate mode. Robin Hood says they use the trait with really stubborn people and trolls. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed from like my street outreach when I do cubes and things like that, but I try to take like the least debatey kind of approach as I possibly can. I've had some more confrontational conversations that I haven't even posted, and I'm kind of debating in myself whether I should post. But generally speaking, people are very pleasant, and the conversation ends up being almost more like a very positive version of an intervention, kind of just like you're kind of on someone's side. I try to stand kind of next to them as opposed to across from them when looking at the screens, and it's more just kind of like trying to keep positive vibes while also saying like, hey, this thing, like, don't do the thing, you know what I mean? Without like browbeating them too much. Now back to this topic, name the trait. I found that it can sometimes just lead to situations where people aren't sure of an answer, and it can kind of press people for an answer and kind of distract from the situation sometimes. I'm not sure if it's the best thing to kind of try to induce this compassionate connection with non-human animals by forcing people to kind of use that logical mind and to try to get them to come up with this like logically consistent reason why they do what they do. A lot of times I think that people will make an emotional connection if you just maintain rapport and kind of like hold space while they're watching that footage. But it can be a useful tool. I'm not going to knock name the trait at all. But yeah, I don't know that it's always beneficial.
Logic and like what one might want to do in a perfect world. But it doesn't have anything to do with our current society, because I think at least in Canada and the US, I think we're capable of being
like,
fully
I would like let's just try to get over this, because I think it's an easy point to kind of maybe brush to the side and continue the discussion, or maybe we could come to an agreement. So you think name the trait wouldn't be an effective argument in a society where, say, they may have to kill children if there's like a huge lack of abundance of food or something?
Correct. So only in the philosophical side of how I like to discuss things does name the trait matter. So I just want to throw that element in. My main concern is we care about animals. We want the world to stop eating animals. And because it's legal to eat animals, we have to convince people that want to eat animals not to. So
yeah, I think Carson did a good job. And I think Vegan Gaines was kind of getting getting maybe tired of that topic as well. And I think Carson did a good job of bringing it back to the point that we're here to protect animals, and that Name the Trait is kind of more in the philosophical realm. And as far as street outreach goes, I think it can be a useful thing to bring up with people who tend to have more of that kind of a personality, for the lack of a better word, who might try to kind of like, who might have a supposedly well-formed position on animal exploitation.
In not that being nice to carnists always works, but there's almost no other option. We have to convince them because the law is not on our side.
Right, but your point about Name the Trait, you're saying it's unpractical to use Name the Trait, I don't know, on indigenous tribes people or something?
Just as far as looking at a philosophical idea, Name the Trait just doesn't completely work, because it only works if you look at our current society. I think it fits within our society. I shouldn't have sidetracked off to that, but I just do not think it's consistent, because it's only referring to our abundance we have now.
Well, no, it's not. Again, like you admitted that there's no logical issue with Name the Trait. There's no logical contradiction that it creates. Like, again, all it's doing is testing for logical consistency. So I just don't understand how it wouldn't apply. You couldn't use Name the Trait in, like, say, a setting with indigenous tribes people where they may have to violate human rights for some, like, I don't know, greater overall good to prevent more people from dying.
Sorry, I got slightly sidetracked. Can you repeat that last part?
So Name the Trait, you admitted that there's no logical inconsistency that it creates, but Name the Trait, it only tests logical consistency. So I don't understand how it would only apply or make sense to use that sort of strategy in a situation where society is very abundant in resources, because again, you're only deploying it to test logical consistency.
I think I understand what Carson's saying now, and I want to say hey to Pundit real quick. What's up, Pundit? Yeah, I think what Carson is saying is that if you're approaching, if there's a society that's approaching like desperation measures, that if you were to ask them like, hey, like, what's the trait difference between the humans you're protecting and the animals you're killing? I think he's saying that they wouldn't really want to stop and get into a philosophical dialogue about that. I think that's what he's saying.
So whether you're in a society that has, you know, inalienable human rights, that has resource abundance, or a tribal society that's very unabundant in resources, and they may have to violate human rights for the greater good of society to prevent further deaths, you can still run Name the Trait. Again, there's no logical problem with Name the Trait itself. And it's entirely about testing logical consistency. So if you're trying to argue with indigenous tribes people about Name the Trait, why they shouldn't kill animals, if they're in favor of killing human beings for their own survival, and they either find a trait that they can name where that would require them to take away human rights, or further take away human rights, or if they can't name a trait, there's no logical problem. So it really just ends up with whatever they choose.
For sure. And I agree with you there. And that's why I pointed out, like, I mostly like the idea. Whenever I see it used, I feel like it's often used as the reason for veganism. And I think there's a lot of loopholes in there. But yes, for the logic alone, and if you're right, that's all it's for, then that is correct. But also, it's not just about rights violations, because there wouldn't be a rights violation by neglecting to protect somebody. I mean, in my mind anyways, if there's somebody that is unable to take care of themselves, like an extremely handicapped person, I'm glad we live in a society that values life and will protect them. But it's not a rights violation to let somebody essentially be neglected to death. But again,
all right, so I think this is basically kind of just like they're basically kind of setting the stage for the discussion about non-human animal rights and human rights, and kind of maybe just kind of feeling out where they stand on both respective topics here. I don't really have much to say so far about that.
And it's sure I would say in most situations that'd be correct. I'd agree with you there.
But yeah, so sorry I sidetracked onto that, but I am curious, do you really think, sorry to word like that, do you think that there's a possible vegan future by being extreme to carnists, the people that we want to convince? I feel like we just need to have good conversations, find good middle ground, and eventually work our way through them.
Okay, I don't know what you mean by being extreme. Like, do you mean terrorism, like blowing up slaughterhouses, or do you mean just like making an argument?
I would say making rude, pushy arguments. Like, so you can show people this is what happens in the slaughterhouse. You tell all the facts. We shouldn't hold back. But when people talk about how like they're not going to go vegan, but you have an opportunity to discuss ideas of like reduction and various things to get the thoughts flowing in their head too.
Okay, so one thing I don't like that Carson's doing here is he's equating like being nice with carnists with being like pro-reducitarianism or pro-welfareism kind of thing. Like, I don't think those two are synonymous. I think you can have a firm message, and you can convey the abolitionist message and do so in a respectful manner and tell it how it is, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that compromising the message is necessarily nice. I think compromising the message leads to a loss of respect from the other party.
Slowly work towards a vegan future. I feel like there's almost no other route to go. And in that video that I did on Joey Carbstrong, the second she said she wasn't going to be a vegan, I could see in his eyes, he was like, oh, I can't create a vegan here. So now I'm going to berate her about everything and just like attack her. I don't know. I just don't think it's a good approach.
So I have a few things to say about like rudeness. You mentioned that specifically. So what's rude to one person can be different for another person. Like I've debated, Muslims and Christians on religion before. Like if you make a very strong argument where they can't really think of any way to, rebut that. Like I've brought up, the problem of evil. You'll see a lot of Christians and Muslims will get really mad at you for bringing up the problem of evil because it's just an extremely strong argument, and people just get frustrated.
I just want to say something about the idea of like being rude to people or not being rude to people. I mean, I try my best not to be rude to people. I've been very standoffish at times when doing outreach, I'll readily admit. But I wish that when I was pre-vegan that somebody had just stopped and told me how cruel the things that I was participating in were. All it took for me was somebody to tell me when I was quote unquote vegetarian that eggs weren't vegetarian in their culture. I looked it up. I saw how cruel it was. And I was like, wow, this is just as unnecessary as eating flesh. And then I stopped eating those things. And I mean, I remember I knew a vegan person just around that time, and I had asked them, like, they said they'd never eaten cheese. They were from an island culture, and they were like, well, I've never tried it. And I was like, what? How can you live without cheese? Like, I wish at that point they had said to me, you're not a baby cow, bro, or something like that. I wish they had been stern with me. So I think there is a place for being firm, but yeah, I don't think Vegan Gains is advocating for being rude either.
When they have to, answer very difficult questions or their beliefs are challenged. It's not necessarily rude to do that. It's just the way they react to something like that. And that's not something you can really control. So if you're debating veganism, you make a very strong argument. Like, I don't know, would you kill and eat your dog? Okay, no. So what's different about a cow? I've seen people get pissed off at that. Like I've literally seen people get into fights with activists.
Yeah, I think Vegan Gains brings up a great point too. Like people, a lot of carnists are really fast to get outraged. There was that recent, what was that? David Rams recently covered that some famous person had made this, some kind of thing about the dairy industry. And then people got outraged because she was Australian, and they somehow connected the fact that she said that babies are taken away from mothers in the dairy industry. They somehow connected that to Australian like colonizers taking babies away from Aboriginal people, and ended up like, causing this huge backlash. And she ended up like apologizing and stuff. So yeah, I think if we're worried about what's going to offend the sensibilities of carnists when we're reaching out to them, I think that we're not taking the issue seriously enough. I mean, that being said, it is kind of like a hostage negotiation where the carnist is willing and able to kill the non-human animal, and you're kind of like trying to be the person saying like, whoa, like don't do that. And you want them to like not hang up the phone. But at the same time, I don't think that we really should take the sensibilities of a carnist that seriously, like especially when it pertains to things like language, like using words like beef, using words like pork. I stopped doing that a long time ago. That's not something that I'll ever do consciously, because that just appeals to the sensibilities of people who are literally eating carcasses of animals. Lee Dooley says the only person other than my wife who I've converted to veganism, my behavior could have been construed as rude, but I was being honest with her because she was a good friend and had to get serious. Vegan Gains. Lee Dooley says Vegan Gains is right. Some people see rude, other people see firm. And I think to kind of harken back to something that Paul Bashir, the co-founder of Anonymous with Voiceless, has said, intimacy or honesty is the highest form of intimacy. So if you're straight up with somebody, they will respect you more. And he also says, quote, real recognizes real. And I think like, if you're listening to this and you're used to kind of like tiptoeing around the issue, maybe try a more direct approach. Try mixing in some direct statements of irrefutable facts along with the questions you ask. Now, make sure that what you're saying as factual statements are actually facts. One thing I used to do is kind of like, I would make more kind of like, for the lack of a better word, kind of like spiritual claims. Like I would say like eating animals is bad karma, which I guess for some people has worked. James Aspie who I was lucky enough to meet, he said that the thing that kind of spurred his vegan journey, quote unquote, is when somebody said to him that eating animals was bad karma. So I mean, maybe for some people that works, but I try to stick very much to facts when I make factual statements. The Socratic method is wonderful, and I think we should try to err on the side of asking questions. But I think a lot of times we need to recognize our role as the expert here. And if you're vegan, if you've been vegan for any appreciable period of time, 2-3 months, whatever, you're a relative expert compared to the carnists. So you need to kind of like step into your power. You have a responsibility to use that power. Akash says, I would say that the problem of evil is, in most instances, a problem of irrationally causes by some form of tribalism. I found most people are kind, just a matter of expanding it. I'm not sure if Akash is referring to the same thing, referring to the problem of evil. As I understand, the problem of evil is an argument regarding theism and non-theism, where basically like people say, if God exists, then why are there babies born with HIV or something like that? So it's kind of like, why are there things that are tragic and could be construed as being caused by the source, an evil source or something like that. Literally says the most infuriating is winning the vegan debate countless times and the opponent refuses to ever change. My parents, for instance. Yeah. And I mean, we're all familiar with those cop-outs that people use. I had the hardest time getting my parents to change. My dad's not vegan yet, but my mom is. But for the longest time when talking to my mom about it, I mean, I bring it up all the time. Like, I kind of like, I'm very flamboyantly vegan in my everyday life. And my mom was just basically like, she was kind of like trying to cop out of the conversation by saying like her blood pressure was rising and stuff like that. When I would try to talk to her about it. And I mean, with my dad, he eats, I would say like probably a 95 to 99% plant-based diet. He still is eating fishes, unfortunately, and maybe some eggs, and occasional dairy. But yeah, it's family is very hard to kind of like to convince to adopt a change, especially when they've seen you eating animals. And it can be really frustrating when family actually blames you for the fact that you ate animals for so long. And at least in my case, I've been like, well, who do you think I learned that from? Like when I was 5, I was asking my parents if the animal flesh was from like actual animals or if it was just made in a factory. And they tell me it was made in a factory. So like, even when I was 5, I don't know how I had a concept of non-animal flesh derived of meat, quote unquote. But yeah, Lee Dooley says their parents use the cop-out happy humane meat. And yeah, and that's a big problem with welfareism. I hope to bring that up with Carson when we talk. I believe that is scheduled for the 5th, which is Monday at I think 2 p.m. Central. Hopefully people can make it. Lee Dooley asked their mom to call her hog farmer and ask which gas chamber they're sent to. She doesn't deny they're killed in gas chambers. And then in the next instance, they eat factory farmed animals at Starbucks drive-thru. Yeah. And that's the other thing where like a lot of times I'll talk to hunters, for example, or people who say that they're like, oh, my uncle has a farm where he raises free range chickens. And it's not a matter of concern when they're buying, a box of whatever processed cookies or something like that has eggs and milk in it. All right. I'm going to try to get through this a little bit more. This is it's going to otherwise take a really long time.
Because they're handing out flyers about Canada Goose. So you can't really control who isn't going to get mad at you as long as you use what I guess would be considered generally acceptable behaviors in social settings. I don't think you're really doing anything wrong if you make somebody frustrated. I think it's good to make some people frustrated because if they're frustrated, they're maybe more likely to think about it more. I've actually come into contact with a lot of people just out in daily life who've seen me through my YouTube channel, and they said at first they fucking hated me because I pissed them off so much, but they kept thinking about me and hate watching me, and then they eventually just had to accept that, oh, like, he's right. Like, I've gotten that quite a lot, so I also don't think it's necessarily a bad debate strategy to be okay with frustrating people.
Yeah, and that's awesome that worked out for the people that are watching you. I would just imagine from what we can recognize from people. I mean, if you just look at how people react to the idea of vegans in general, there's such a negative idea to the word. And now part of that is because people hate the idea of feeling judged. And so they're going to just have this negative vibe to it. But I think a big part of it is when you get kind of wackadoodles like that vegan teacher saying these extreme things like that Alex O'Connor should be hung and, all these different things. It makes people just think instantly vegan bad. And
Okay, so I don't think that we should be swayed by people supposedly having a negative view of the V word. Like, I don't think that we should avoid using the word vegan in our outreach. That being said, there have been instances where someone has asked me when I've been doing outreach, like, so are you vegan? And I've said, like, well, what would it mean if I was? It's always when someone is kind of like, they're opening up like a box, like an unchecked box in their brain when they ask you, like, are you vegan? And then you basically have the chance to check that or not check it. If you check that box, all the schemas, all the prejudices, the prejudgments of veganism that they have in asking that question all get checked at once. And it's just like just a downstream activation of all their prejudices. So it can be, if I'm not discouraging people from saying yes, if someone asks you, are you vegan? But I would say you got to be strong about it. You can say, like, well, like, why wouldn't I be? And then see what the resistances are. A lot of people are actually really eager to go vegan, and they just throw up token objections because that's what they think should happen, because they kind of like need some kind of impetus to go vegan. It's kind of like this saying, like, don't oversell a Ferrari. Like, a person who walks into a Ferrari dealership doesn't need to be convinced that it's a badass car. They just need to they need that push. A lot of people are in that situation. And if you're out at something like a Cube, the people who stop are oftentimes those people who want to talk about it and who just need that little push. And that's why the Cube is a really great way to kind of like pre-filter people who aren't going to take the issue seriously. Now about like, should vegans be saying that like non-vegans should die and things like that? I don't think so. I'm not in favor of like condemning people to death, and giving up on them essentially. Nor am I a favor of like using violence in any fashion. And of course, if you try, like, you have to also look at the society in which we live in, and violent acts that people could engage in to promote animal activism kind of stuff would be seen as a pathological case, within the society. I mean, I'm not discounting the violence that carnists are promoting, engaged in, directly supporting, but I don't think that promotion of a peaceful message should be done violently at all.
I think in my mind right now, the best thing we can do is try to get everybody, because most people are against animal abuse. Every time I ask somebody that eats meat if they'd be okay with punching a cow in the face for no reason, they say no. So somewhere in there, they think it becomes okay. And if we just get the whole world, all the non-vegans talking and having, in the same way that people talk about abortion and circumcision and all these different things, instead of either go vegan or nothing, if we get everybody talking about...
Ralph, if you're talking about me saying a lot, yeah, I'm aware that I do it. I apologize. It's something I'm working on, but I just did again. But about the topic of Carson saying that that everyone is against animal abuse, that is what people say, but in practice, people are supporting animal abuse, and it just so happens to be the case that 99% of people say they're against factory farming. Yeah, 99% of the animal products, quote unquote animal products, come from factory farms. So it's something to consider. We got to hold people accountable.
Hey, let's force our government to change regulations. Let's get cameras in factory farms, making sure people can't do the worst of the worst. Let's start reducing. Let's start going for free range. All the silly ideas of humane slaughter work in that direction to eventually get to the goal. But I don't think we can just bounce to that goal.
It would, like, yeah. So when it comes to things like animal rights, you're going to have the pendulum. The pendulum is kind of swinging in that direction of animal abolition. But if you're a vegan activist, you, by definition, would have to argue for the rights of these animals. And when you're just making these welfarist arguments, that's not vegan activism. That's just animal welfarism. So you are going to have to make arguments like name the trait, where you link human rights and animal rights together. So even though I understand that, yeah, there is a pendulum and it's swinging in one direction, and you're going to see incremental changes over time. If we're talking about vegan activism specifically, you do have to make those arguments linking animal rights and human rights. It's kind of like if we were to be back maybe 200 years ago when black people were still in slavery. You're not going to make the argument that Okay, well, maybe we could just improve, the welfare of these black people, make it illegal to import slaves because, they're dying on these ships and it's really horrible. And maybe we should just, make it so they can't be whipped too hard. They can only, be punished by their means. Like, if you're a human rights activist, you wouldn't make those arguments. You'd make the argument that these are human beings too. I don't see any difference between black people and white people other than skin color. So why aren't we granting them the same rights that we have?
No.
Yeah, in this, I didn't know that you could watch a live stream at 2x speed. I guess, because Ralph started late. Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Legally, for your understanding. Yeah, I've heard that if you say a lot, you should just try not to speak at all and just be silent. But anyhow, I guess we could all use a little more mindfulness and things like that. But anyway, I think what Vegan Gains is saying is spot on, in that if we ascribe moral worth to a group of beings, it only makes sense to advocate for their rights. An example that I can think of is the Yulin Dog Meat Festival. The non-vegans who advocate against that happening don't advocate for these dogs to be killed more humanely or killed with a sharper knife or not boiled alive and killed more quickly or stunned before they're killed or something like that. They go and march in the streets and they say, stop killing dogs. So I do feel that it is inherently speciesist to advocate for welfarist positions for any animal.
No, I think that's completely wrong. I think that's exactly what we do and what we did do with slavery. So in the early 1800s, so about a little over 50 years before the Civil War, it became illegal to transport slaves. So the slaves that were here, and then any others would just have to be bred into slavery, which is obviously horrible. But then when it came time to emancipate, there was a bunch of different things. Like a lot of people, especially in the North, wanted to emancipate, but also wanted them to be able to have the right to vote and a handful of things. And Lincoln told one of his senator buddies, if we ask for everything, we will not get the right amount of votes. We need to end slavery. And then like 10, 15 years later, black men got the right to vote. And every movement, whether it's feminism or it's slavery, everything happens in baby steps, usually with everybody fighting to get each next step, like ending bullfighting or ending fur. Like fur will probably get ended before consuming animals.
Well, you're kind of conflating legislation and activism. The very first human rights activism against slavery was an abolitionist movement. It's always been an abolitionist movement. It's just that
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that when this progress is made, people still have to be advocating for the abolition. And if nobody is advocating for that position, or if more people are spending their time advocating for these incremental steps, ultimately that's all we get. And I think that if you can't count on a vegan to advocate for the abolitionist position, then who can you count on? So I'd really encourage people, if they have welfarist views, to really think about that. Any time that you spend advocating for welfarism is time that you could spend doing vegan education. And this also goes for single issue campaigns.
Opinion, trying to pass legislation that just makes it harder to for these slave owners to keep owning slaves. But again, the idea behind the movement is abolitionism, and all the arguments in favor of getting rid of slavery are abolitionist. They're not welfarist. It's just that when it comes to legislation, it's easier to pass legislation that's baby steps, like preventing transatlantic slave trade. But if you actually look at the rhetoric of the activism of the day, it's entirely abolitionist. Nobody was making the argument that, well, let's just treat slaves better. Maybe you could just like own like maybe 3 or 4 slaves rather than 10. Nobody was making those sorts of arguments.
Well,
and
I think that's the problem.
But well, I don't see that as a problem. There has to be an abolitionist argument if you're in favor of their rights. Like it has to be abolitionist.
Fair enough. So my general stance is an abolitionist argument. Like, I mean, I go to an extreme. I don't think we should even have pets. I'm pretty set on animals should be nowhere near humans. But I also
it's kind of ironic that Carson is saying that he's like going to an extreme with his vegan abolitionism, but then he calls companion animals pets. It's kind of interesting.
So when I talk to people, I talk about reduction, I talk about various different things. And I think you're right. I think with slavery, the activists, the extremists, the loudest, like that vegan teacher types, but for slavery, were abolitionists only. But the majority of people talking and making it to where the senators wanted to bring the proposition up, the majority were accepting of each of the baby steps. And so I think I don't think the activists should stop having their overall message and telling people like, go fully vegan, that's the thing to do. But the people that won't accept the absolute message, if we had all of us people, especially somebody huge like you, pushing this message of meatless Mondays and some stuff that sounds shitty like that, I really think it would do large things for the animals, for the movement.
Yeah, I'm not going to promote meatless Mondays for the same reason I wouldn't promote slaveless Tuesdays.
Slaveless Tuesdays would be amazing for slaves though, right?
No.
Okay. And this part, I saw this clip before. I think Carson had clipped it. It's that, the welfarist versus abolitionist, or reformist versus revolutionary kind of debate that it's been raging on for who knows how long, in all sorts of rights related movements. Excuse me, Carson's saying that we can kind of we can get society to kind of get on board with small steps and then kind of eventually get there. And Vegan Gain seems like he's arguing more out of principle, and he's saying like, I would never promote slaveless Tuesdays and things like that, for the same reason he wouldn't promote meatless Mondays, because if you promote meatless Mondays, there's kind of this implicit signing off approval on the animal consumption on every other day. Not only that, but meatless Mondays is kind of like, animal flesh is kind of like a single issue when it comes to everything that veganism pertains to. So if somebody's using their time to advocate for meatless Mondays, I would see a much better use of their time being just advocating and educating people about veganism holistically.
That doesn't argue for their rights.
True. Well, it argues for the rights on Tuesday, but they'd feel great about it.
That just argues for a privilege they may be granted, but that doesn't really argue for their rights. Like I wouldn't feel comfortable, telling Hitler, maybe rather than killing all the Jews, you could just kill like maybe 70% so that they just become an ethnic minority.
No, that would be incredible for the Jews.
So if you were, say, in Nazi Germany and you had the power to advocate for Jewish rights, you would be arguing on a platform that let's just, maybe kill off 70% rather than all of them.
If I had a higher likelihood of achieving that than all of them, yes. But I'd probably do something.
I don't think you can never know if you have a higher likelihood of achieving one thing or another. And I think there can always be unintended consequences. I don't think you should ever sacrifice the principle of the message in order for effectiveness. And you should never appease the people who are in a position where they're basically exploiting, oppressing, torturing, commodifying sentient beings with these kind of half measures. So I'm with Vegan Gains on this one.
Like I do now, which is I express that I'm vegan. I express it to the extreme. But the majority of talking to people is seeing where they're at and working with their ideas. I'll talk to non-vegans and say, well, what do you think about this? The whole punch a cow thing. And then slowly start talking about things and they'll go, yeah, I think I might do this. I might try this out.
Yeah. And I think the punch a cow thing is brilliant. I've seen Debug Your Brain, I believe his name is Justin, do something similar where he goes up to people and says like, is it wrong to punch a pig? And if people say, yeah, of course, then he extrapolates from there that they shouldn't be paying people to put pigs in gas chambers or slit their throats and things like that. And I think that's brilliant. So if Carson's doing the is it wrong to punch a pig as his kind of like introduction, I think that's brilliant.
Out. That's the approach I do. And anything people always bring up slavery, Jews, they'll bring up beating women, beating children. Every little bit that helps is good. Beatless Mondays for beating your wife would be amazing for the wife. It just must be, right? Like for the person being harmed, for the animals being harmed, if reductionist ideas make
Beatless Mondays just kind of made me think of beets. I don't know if we have any beet fans in here, but beets are amazing for you. They're a natural source of nitrates. They help vasodilation. They help regulate your blood sugar and keep it from going too high. So definitely load up on beets. If you're going to have beetless Mondays, maybe just don't eat beets for one day a week. Welfare may grant the animal certain privileges, but by no means any rights. Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if it's healthy to eat beets for 6 days out of the week. So take that with a grain of salt.
Us breed less cows into existence. That has to be better, even if it's not the ultimate goal.
Like again, that's welfarism. That's not something that will actually grant them rights. And when you're talking about trying to pass legislation, where you are kind of moving that pendulum towards that direction, again, you're rarely ever going to see huge legislative changes all at once where, one day a whole group doesn't have rights, but now they do have all the same rights. Same with black rights. They first were emancipated, didn't have the right to vote. They were granted the right to vote, then they were granted, these other rights and freedoms gradually. Mm-hmm. But again, if you're looking at activism of the day, when it comes to black rights, when it comes to women's rights, the actual activism itself has always been centered around things like abolitionism. It's only these legislative changes that they knew they could, realistically get that they were okay with. Yeah. But you're never going to see women like advocate, can you just beat us less? Could you just let us maybe not quite vote, but just, be able to, I don't know, have some sort of political.
And I think part of this discussion also, like in the background, there's this theme of hope. And I think that anybody who advocates for an abolitionist position, given a really dire circumstance, actually has a lot of hope that things actually can and will change, and that history, her story, their story, whatever, slants toward good. It's not easy to maintain that hope, but I know that, for example, in the women's suffrage movement, there was a sizable percentage of women who were against obtaining being granted the right to vote, and there were a lot of people who said that it was not a worthwhile thing to do. And advocated, I'm sure people advocated for all sorts of things then, like giving women half a right to vote or something like that. And, nowadays we would see that as just preposterous. But, based on whatever kind of society you're born into, things can be very, very different. But I think that once we establish a principle and once we know the difference between what's a right cause and what's something that would be advocating for something less than that, we should advocate for the right cause.
There's never any, like, this is never part of activism because it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
like nobody ever has these. And again, like, by the way, when you're talking about emancipation of slaves, wars were fought over this. Like, people had to die. Same with actually women being able to have the right to vote. I'm pretty sure people did die. They were planting explosives, and I think in France they actually ended up getting like halberds and pole arms and marching through the streets and like threatening to fucking kill people so that they could get the right to vote. So I mean, when you're talking about vegan extremism, I don't think it's ever going to get to the point where you have vegans blowing up businesses and getting pole arms or going like having flat out civil wars over things like this. So like when we're trying to link these or draw comparisons between black rights and women's rights activism to veganism, I don't know how you could say Joey Carbstrong is committing extreme activism.
Oh, I wouldn't call him committing extreme activism. But real quick, I do want to mention, I don't like to pretend I know things that I don't, and I don't like to claim something is something that I don't know. So you might be right about, like, for women's rights that they were never going for individual issues. But I don't know if that's true. Because
well, I'm not saying they didn't go for individual issues. Yeah, women's rights, like every activist organization or movement, does attack single issues. So,
gotcha.
Well, because women didn't vote, emancipation.
Yeah. Women didn't have the right to own property. They didn't have the right for divorce. If there was a divorce, they didn't have the right to own their children, and they didn't have the right to vote. And each of those happened in like 10-year increments, like something like that. And
okay, so the conversation. Hey, what's up, Lewis? Good to see you. The conversation has now shifted a little bit from welfarism. It seems Carson has brought up the idea of single issue campaigns, which I kind of mentioned earlier.
And sure, the overall thing was where women were human, let us be. But each time something came close to like being voted into law, there would probably be some big push like, don't piss off the men too much by saying we want this and that. Let's just let us get the right to own property. Instead of when the husband dies, it goes to the oldest son. Now the woman can own her own house. And that's kind of what I think we need to do.
Sure, but like, you've called Joey Carbstrong an extremist, right? Or he's doing like extreme forms of vegan activism. Like, again, if we're going to draw parallels between human rights activism when it comes to women's rights, black rights, and you're fine with women's rights and black rights movements, saying things like black people should have a right to vote, they should be emancipated, and women saying same thing. Like, I don't know why it's extreme for a vegan activist to use an argument like name the trait and say animals should have a right to live.
Sorry, no, I wasn't saying that the name the trait was extreme. That was just a separate note. But okay, no, you're right though. Him being extreme, it's what I call extreme, is nowhere near what the other extreme things we're talking about. It's just, in my mind, the idea is if something pushes away the person we're trying to convince, I call that extreme.
Okay. So maybe Carson's just using a different definition of the word extreme than Richard. We have a question from Ralph. Ralph says, "You don't say plant-based and vegan are the same thing, do you? I thought it was on your video that I had to correct the person that made the video in the comments where they had answered a question." I think maybe Ralph was referring to, was it the video about halal versus like I was outreaching a gentleman who's Muslim. And I was saying that plant-based is always halal. And I think somebody in the comments had said that plant-based doesn't even necessarily mean vegan. And I think I had said something like plant-based food is always vegan, and vegans consume plant-based food. I think I'd said something like that. I definitely think that vegan is, the ethical stance versus plant-based being the diet. And I think that vegans generally would consume a plant-based diet. Of course, there are things that we also consume, like minerals that may come from rocks and things like that, or we may consume fungi, which technically aren't plants. But I think that generally speaking, a vegan would follow a plant-based diet. And I was going to say something else about that. Sorry, I just drew a blank. All squares are rectangles. Yeah, something like that. Oh, wait, no, I just lost it again. About this idea that if something is plant-based, is that necessarily like a vegan thing to consume? I think that this has a lot to do with industry. And I think that a lot of companies who are exploiting animals are now trying to sneak stuff by as plant-based and use that term. I've seen like animal flesh products that have plants mixed in with the animal flesh, like it's gross. Say things like plant-based. So I think it's being there are culture vultures who are exploiting that term. But I think plant-based, in my mind, that means it's from vegetation. And I guess colloquially speaking, I would include mushrooms in that as well. I love mushrooms, by the way. My girlfriend doesn't though.
And that made me want to ask you a question, though. If we could press a button and magically know that going the approach I'm saying would get us to a...
And on that note, if you live with somebody who doesn't like mushrooms and you love mushrooms and you're trying to get them to like mushrooms, something that really helps is like mushroom powder and using that as a supplement, so they can still get the goodness of mushrooms. I've read about a lot of different immune benefits of mushrooms. They're kind of an interesting food, I guess, because they're not really readily they're not readily evident as nutritious, but supposedly they do have a lot of different health benefits, particularly related to the immune system, from what I read. In the nutrition space, I've seen plant forward diet. Yeah, plant forward diet or plant strong. I've seen those as well.
Legally vegan world in North America in 20 years, and that going the approach that you're saying we should go, if we knew it would take, say, 50 years. With that magical knowledge, do you still think there's a wrong thing to it, or is it just that you don't think it's likely that my approach would be best?
Well,
and yeah, in terms of mushrooms, I know that some mushrooms you have to cook them. I like to eat them raw. I like to eat some mushrooms raw, like the ones that you can eat raw. Mushroom powder and cinnamon and coffee. You know, I had to stop drinking coffee because I have familial hypercholesterolemia. It's crazy, but you know, I've been vegan for over 10 years now. And last time I got my cholesterol checked, I was like well over 300. And my LDL was like off the charts, like worse than the very high. So I'm in a process of losing weight right now. I've lost about 20 pounds in the last month, which sounds kind of crazy, but I did it. And that's the only time really, like when I'm about like 165 right now pounds. I've only really been able to get my cholesterol down to like less than 200 when I've been like 140. So I still have like 25 pounds to go. I'm going to be freaking skinny, but it's basically what I have to do because otherwise I'm going to have to take a statin. And I'm already taking red yeast rice, which I guess has lovastatin in it. But anyway, it's another topic for another day. Health issues are fun. Haas, have you heard of the portfolio diet? I have not. But I'd be interested in looking into it. You know, my diet is, I tend to eat pretty simply. You know, and I think this is something that I got from my mom. Because my dad, you know, he eats a mostly plant-based diet, and his total has been between like 140 and 160 in recent times. Whereas with my mom, you know, hers is also high like mine, and neither of them would be considered really overweight. Plant-based diet to lower cholesterol. That's cool. I'll look into it. I take things like plant sterols also, which are supposed to replace cholesterol in your gut, kind of like occupying the same receptor sites. Kind of like if you think about it, like there's these boats that are calling cholesterol to be taken back up into the body from the intestine. Supposedly these plant-based sterols kind of like mimic cholesterol and go kind of grab seats in the boat and then go back up and don't do as much harm. But yeah, it's something that, you know, just got to kind of I got to just get to a point where the lipid amount in my blood is low enough to where it's not really an issue. And, you know, I enjoyed the times when I was like 140 pounds anyway. I would do a lot of hiking and stuff, a lot of trail running. I used to run marathons like when I was around that weight. And I love being able to just go out and run and feel like, you know, 6 miles is just a warm up, you know, and just be able to keep going. I used to love cycling also, like road cycling, like just going out cycling 30 miles and coming back and stuff. So I really intend to get back into that stuff. And yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to hopefully do some of that stuff this summer. And let's see. Lee Dooley says, just want to circle back to what Ralph said real quick here on the topic of plant-based. Ralph was saying that vegans eat a plant-based diet, but plant-based doesn't equal vegan. A plant-based person might still consume some animal products or other. Yeah, exactly. There are many people who I think call themselves vegan who are actually plant-based, but yeah, and I do think that is kind of a necessary thing to gatekeep to some extent. If there's somebody who is plant-based and they're calling themselves vegan, it might piss them off. They might go talk shit to their friends about you, but I think that that's a line in the sand that really needs to be drawn. The last thing that I think we want to be doing is watering down the definition of veganism. And I hope to talk to Carson about that when we talk on Monday, because I think he's kind of proposing a different definition of veganism that I feel like he's hoping that it kind of like brings more people into the fold of veganism and kind of like increases the numbers in a way. But I don't know that there's even a theoretically practical way to do that. And I don't think that it's necessarily wise. Lee Dooley says it's a proven diet to lower cholesterol. It's plant-based. I already read that. 50 grams of soy protein, 2 grams of plant sterols. Wow, 2 grams of plant sterols. That's a lot of plant sterols. Maybe I should up my dose of it a bit. 1 serving of nuts a day. Yeah, I've been keeping my nut intake really low. I've been tracking everything on Chronometer for the last 30. I hit 35 days yesterday, and I've been keeping my calorie intake right around averaging about 1,200 a day. So I'm keeping it like ridiculously low. My maintenance is around 2,200. That's how I managed to lose so much weight. And I've been able to maintain my strength and muscle just by consuming usually between like on the lower end, maybe 60, but on most days I've been consuming, oh, hey, Carson, good to see you. Mostly consuming around like 105, 120 grams of protein a day. It's been one of those things where I've actually had to kind of like take the L in terms of people saying that vegans don't get enough protein. I find that if I don't if I don't eat like tofu, tempeh, or drink protein shakes, I struggle to get over like 60 grams. Now that being said, I'm eating a 1,200 calorie diet mostly. So I'm eating about half of what a normal, like, when I say normal, I mean just like the average adult would eat. I'm sure that if I ate a 2,000 calorie diet of whole plant foods, I would be able to reach the RDA of 56 or 60 grams or whatever it is. But when you're calorie restricting to the extent that I have, I find that it's necessary to take some kind of a protein supplement, which, like Huel, or I have this stuff called Purely Inspired. I use Vega. Those all work really well. And I've seriously managed to keep my energy levels, if not have more energy. And it's been pretty good. Lee Dooley says that's where they're at right now. Only 10K today, easy. They have their first marathon in November. Wow, good for you. That's really great to hear. I hope to get back to that point. I think it's really all about early mornings. That's what keeps me disciplined. And I guess like kind of getting addicted to positive habits has been really great. I apologize that this has turned into a whole health related thing. But yeah, it's something that I'm really passionate about. So I appreciate people for sticking around and listening to that. All right, back to the discussion.
Oh, I would just say it's likely that your approach wouldn't be best. But if I had a crystal ball and my ultimate goal was, abolitionism, I'd probably go with your approach. If I somehow knew, because you'd end up saving like literally trillions of animals with that approach. Just the difference in lives saved would be massive.
For sure.
But you mentioned, by definition, extreme activism is anything that pushes away the people that you're trying to reach. So like that could literally be anything.
Oh, true. But what I would say is like something that we could recognize reasonably. I mean, obviously it's subjective, but if somebody just hears that somebody's vegan and thinks that we shouldn't harm animals and they think that's stupid, then that doesn't mean anything. That the idea that they're going to think that no matter what doesn't make anything a person said extreme. But if somebody says something specifically that would bother somebody when they could have said something else, I don't know the exact. I guess just the idea of telling people you should be a vegan, and if you're not, then you're killing these animals and it's horrible. And then the person says, well, maybe I'll cut back. I'll do like half the amount. And instead of like viewing that as progress, telling the person, no, if you do that, you're still horrible. And then the person goes, oh, well, I don't even want to be associated with vegans. I have to call that extreme.
Okay, so I think what Carson is saying is that if you have an abolitionist stance and if you advocate for it in basically a rude way, that would be extreme. That's what I understand. I don't think he's saying that if somebody says that they're gonna cut their animal consumption by 50% and then you keep pushing, or that you tell them that they're still going to be abusing animals, I don't think he's calling that extreme. I'm not sure exactly. Ralph says, is there anything you disagree with Vegan Gains or you debate him about? Yeah, I've had a little brief discussion where I logged into Vegan Gains' Discord and talked to him on his channel about the idea of predating carnivorous animals. I'm not in agreement with him on that topic, but I do tend to see eye to eye with him in terms of having like a clear abolitionist vegan message.
If it's going to push away progress for animals.
Okay, I have a few things to say there. So, like, say if we were like killing and eating black people, and somebody were to say, you were to have this argument that like Joey Carbstrong does with Change My Mind and everything. and you were to say, well, black people have feelings too. There are people like us. And then they say, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'll just like have the amount of black people I kill and eat during a week. Like I've been killing and eating, 2-3 black people a week. Maybe I'll just kill one black person a week.
Mhm.
Would you be like, that's super?
Yes. I wouldn't do it in the silly way that you just did it, but I would say like, oh, that's awesome. And I think, you're on a good track, like, because we're talking about something being legal, something that these people can do. So the only thing that stands between them and doing it is them being convinced not to. Now, I think it's bullshit. I think there's a lot of bullshit in the world, like circumcision and the death penalty and all these things.
Yeah. And just want to say, I'm very, very much against genital mutilation and the death penalty as well. I don't think the state should have a right to take someone's life as a punishment, and I don't think that we should be mutilating babies without their consent and permanently changing their bodies. That being said, I wanted to address this comment by Contrarian. I agree 100% with Reasonable Vegan's point there. If you lose converts, you may have converted with a subtler approach. It's a net negative to animal suffering. I mean, I don't think you even have to necessarily go utilitarian with your thinking there. I think you can just kind of pick and choose your battles. I think that using a subtler approach has the time and place. For example, I think that if we're talking about like your family, for example, or your friends or coworkers or people that you see on a regular basis, I think a subtler approach is oftentimes the way to go. I think that there's a certain reality to street activism, which some people have maybe not grappled with, where you only like somebody can just walk away from you and then they're gone. So you only have so long to essentially captivate their, get their attention, then captivate their interest, then kind of spark a principled desire if they get to that point, and then kind of send the message, and you don't really have a lot of time to do that oftentimes. Contrarian says rather a net increase in animal suffering in the failure to adopt conversion methods to love. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time and the place. Ralph says, hang on, do you actually understand his position? He'd only be favor if it is Ralph. I think Ralph is maybe responding to Contrarian, not to my talking about Vegan Gains' position on carnivorous animal predation.
But when we're working in a society where the laws are the only thing preventing people from doing things, if you could legally eat black people and I convince somebody to eat half the amount of black people, there's going to be a handful of black people very happy that I'm happy that they're not being killed, right?
Yeah, my next question about that would be, so why would you think that kind of bending to the knee to that idea that, well, it's a good compromise that you're killing less black people, why do you think that would create a greater sort of moral push for somebody?
Okay, so they talked about welfareism, then they kind of segued into single issues, and now they're talking about reducitarianism.
To change versus really trying to get them to recognize that they're committing a horrible atrocity. Like, I think it's like, I think especially when we're talking about animals, even among animal rights activists, we tend to trivialize animal lives, even though we consider, animals, just as we say we consider animals, just as important as human beings. But it sounds like you're trivializing the lives of animals when you say shit like this. I don't like the idea of, saying, well, that's a good.
Okay. Ralph, you were referring to that, the thing about predation. Then in that case, he'd only be in favor if it was 100% guaranteed to not cause more harm. I mean, yeah, in that case, I guess I would just, it's one of those things where, if we could be guaranteed that it wouldn't cause more harm, I'm just not sure if I would still want to sign off on using violent methods on any animal. I guess like maybe that would reach a certain, maybe that would be, I guess I'd have to really know what was meant by not causing more harm. I'd love to talk to Richard about that. If you'd welcome a discussion, that would be pretty awesome.
Step that you're, reducing animal deaths. I don't think anybody would accept that if we're talking about like a human atrocity, like a Holocaust. Yes. We wouldn't be like, if somebody were really committing a Holocaust and they said, okay, well, I'll kill half as many people as I was planning, we wouldn't give them a pat on the back. We'd still say, you're a sick fuck and you should be, brought to justice.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, like going back to one statement you said vegan teacher was being extreme when she said Alex O'Connor should be hung. Can you give me an argument for why he deserves to live?
Why he deserves to live, probably for the animal's sake, because if he was killed for eating animals in the world we live in where it's legal, it would make people less likely to.
I mean, I don't think that that the reason that Alex O'Connor deserves to live is because of anything that he does or doesn't do. I think he deserves to live because he's a sentient being who presumably wants to continue his life. I mean, I don't really I don't think that it's really productive to talk about why carnists like deserve to live or not.
To switch over now, now in the future she will look right. Her statement will look right in the future, but her statement harms animals today.
So, wait. So the only argument you can give to justify Alex O'Connor's life is that other people would find that as an act of extremism. But outside of that, if this were, say, a situation where he'd be killed and he wasn't a public figure, and nobody knew that this was a politically motivated killing, you'd be in favor of his death?
At this point, I would. If the information we have about being healthy on a vegan diet could be like 100%. We're all convinced of it, and there's been enough time that it's official. We need no animals. Then I would say that yes, with that knowledge, and especially if it was in law, I would be in favor of that for sure. At this point, I would say even though I think we can be vegan and healthy, I've been vegan 8 years. My daughter's 7, and she was born vegan and has always been. I think we can be, but it's new enough that I don't like to make that extreme claim.
And I think this kind of reminds me of they just Carson was saying he's against circumcision and the death penalty. I think that, if we're against the death penalty, then obviously that would extend to this case as well. Let's see. We got a couple comments here. Ralph says that he personally just chemically sterilized predators in that case. And this other comment by Ralph says the same reason could be given for Ted Bundy getting to live. He's sentient and wants to live. Now, yeah, I'm not against using the law to punish people. I'm just against the death penalty. So yeah, I guess you could use that. You could use that rationale. Lee Dooley says, like, I think it's a worse punishment, Ralph, to put somebody in prison for their life than to end their life. Okay, so Lee Dooley says, I always think of that as a response to hunters saying we need to kill deer. They're invasive. Why not sterilize? Yeah, I asked Vegan Gains about this, and he said that if they're going around killing other animals, that sterilizing them is essentially not a fast enough solution. And that, if there was somebody going around killing humans, sterilizing them would essentially, he's saying that wouldn't prevent them from going around and continuing to kill more people. So that was his response to that. And I'm not sure how relevant all this is to veganism in the first place. No, Ralph, I'm not in favor of our tax dollars going to pay for animals to be killed to feed people. I think that all prisons should be vegan. I think that all institutions should be vegan. Reasonable Vegan says, I'd say that we don't even need to punish, just remove from the ability to harm further. Yeah, and I mean, incarceration would effectively accomplish that.
That, like, if I was out in nature and I saw a man killing another man, I would kill the killer. But a man in nature without a society killing an animal and eating it, I would be on the fence, especially depending on.
I'm not sure if Richard means that if he was in nature and he saw a man killing a man, that he would kill the killer as they were attempting to kill somebody, or if he would like punish the killer by killing them. If it's the former, I'm kind of ambivalent on that. If it's the latter, I would be against that, unless it was like going to put, I don't know. I'm not sure on that, honestly. Okay, so Lee Dooley says, it's armchair philosophy talking about killing predators and stuff. It's just thought experiments theologically consistent. We got to focus on veganism and stop killing trillions of animals. Yeah. Okay, so Carson says it is the latter. So he's saying that if he saw a man in nature kill another man, that he would try to kill. Like, if he saw somebody kill someone and the person was killed, he would try to kill the killer. Interesting.
On what knowledge I felt comfortable with. So anyways, I don't want to say I think Alex should die, but I can imagine a realistic world where it does become a very harsh punishment for harming animals for no reason, like enjoying their flesh.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like you're kind of making an excuse for him that maybe he's ignorant and he could change in the future. But I mean, like, while that's happening, he's probably, over the course of years or decades that he may be alive, where he isn't going to be vegan, he's likely going to be responsible for the death of several hundreds, if not thousands, of animals. So if this were like a similar circumstance where a human being thought in some way he was justified in killing other humans, and he, for some reason, thought it was necessary either for political reasons or for health reasons or what have you, you would feel comfortable with letting that person kill hundreds or thousands of people over the course of how many years until the society they lived in came to this new realization that there isn't any political or health or otherwise reason to kill other human beings.
I think this is essentially somewhat of a trolley problem. I mean, if you have the deaths of the beings on one track, and then you have the being who's causing the deaths on the other track, you know, it's like, what would you choose, kind of a thing. I just think that this is something that people who are in favor of killing, you know, of making the train run over the person perpetrating the harm need to think about, in the sense that there's a, you know, someone could make an argument about essentially all of us causing harm, you know, more harm than, you know, a fruit fly or something like that. I think it's a topic that I think has a lot of entrapments, and I think that people who are in favor of killing the predator, I guess, or however you want to look at it, should kind of like consider that in the eyes of other animals whose lives may be taken for our convenience, things like that, that we could very well, you know, in a different thought experiment, be on the side that gets the train pulled on it. So let's see. Ralph has been pretty passionate about this topic. He says, but as things currently are, you say keep child rapist murderers alive and let them eat meat because that is what they're fed. I'm not in favor of ending the life of any perpetrator criminal. I'm in favor of incarceration, and I'm not in favor of using state power to end the life of a criminal. You say let them eat meat. No, I don't say let them eat meat. I think that they should go vegan and demand vegan alternatives. And I've seen instances where prisoners have had to kind of like demand or even petition for vegan food. I think that that's something that they should be doing. I don't think that we should accept them eating non-vegan food, and I don't think that that they should be eating non-vegan food either. An interesting topic is the idea of vegan outreach in prison, like to prisons. I wonder, I'm not sure if anybody has attempted this, but you know, I know people go to colleges and places like that. I really wonder if there are any people going to prisons to advocate for veganism among those populations. It'd be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to be convinced of something, and I feel pretty darn close to convinced of it. But yeah, it would involve needing a society pushing a certain law. If I gained if the healthiest a human could be was a certain number, and I could gain 50% extra health by eating a human, I don't know, out in the world without a society stopping me, maybe I would. If I was on an island and I needed to survive, I would definitely eat a human. So I think it becomes complicated depending on if we're looking at a society and how their laws protect others.
Yeah, so when you're talking about Alex, who's being part of the vegan community, who's an Oxford University graduate, so has to have a pretty good head on his shoulders, and he has made a video admitting that on a well-planned vegan diet, you can be perfectly healthy, and his only excuse was, I can't be fucked to have a well-planned diet because I just like eating it with my friends. You think that's an adequate justification to...
Yeah, this is the thing that I really, I'm still confused about the whole AOC thing, because when he was doing his like vegan philosophy chair talks, he was saying, if you have to eat meat for your health, then, you know, you're still a vegan and stuff like that. Like, pardon my horrible British accent. It's not really intentional. It's just, I mean, when I imitate a person who's British, it just happens. It goes with the territory of being Midwestern or American or something. I don't know, who knows, but that's not a truth claim. It's just, I don't know, I'm conjecturing here, but no, like he would go on these talks and be like, vegan is just, you know, doing what you have to necessarily do, and then like everything else that you have to do is not kind of like covered by the clause, because it's only as far as practicable possible and that kind of thing. So I guess my question is, if he's being honest with himself and the animal carcasses or whatever he's eating are actually necessary for his well-being, why did he say that he's reconsidering like the ethics of his position, like reconsidering his position on animal ethics, and decided to stop calling himself vegan? Like, you would think that he would be like, oh, this fits under the clause. Like, I really am confused about that, especially because he's been the person kind of pioneering that idea that if you have to do something out of necessity, then you can still call yourself a vegan.
Allow him to live.
To allow him to live. I mean, I guess I have to know what you mean, because I don't want to stop him from living. If I could press a button and I don't get in trouble and I can make him not live, I wouldn't make him and like all carnists die. Again,
well,
I think
him specifically, let's say.
Okay, yeah, him specifically. I think personally, even though I'm not in his shoes, I would sacrifice my speaking tours and whatever else, his IBS and whatever got in the way of. So if I was him, I would have stayed vegan and just stopped doing speaking tours.
Well, no, I'm asking him specifically if he could press a magic button where he would no longer exist. Let's say it's like a death note. You wouldn't press that button, even though nobody could figure out that it was a politically motivated killing.
Well, no. But one reason is I think he's one of the most important voices in the vegan movement, even
He's
today.
not vegan.
I know. Well, he's one of the most important voices in the vegan movement today.
By the way, he never even promoted veganism. If you've seen some of his talks, he's openly spoken, even while claiming to be vegan. He's not in favor of giving animals codified rights into law. So, like, this guy has said tons of things against the idea of veganism. I don't think even his beliefs around vegan activism could be considered vegan.
Well, so what I factor in when I talk about the idea of the vegan movement would be anything going towards less,
by the way,
mm-hmm.
By the way, you'd be okay with somebody killing and eating animals so long as they're a good vegan activist. So,
okay, so here's an interesting topic. If Alex, he's not vegan, obviously. There's no conditional necessary. Whether he actually was ever vegan or not, I mean, you could talk about that forever. But I mean, I heard him advocate for veganism when he was quote unquote vegan. I mean, he did tend to talk more about things like factory farming. He did tend to make more utilitarian arguments. But I mean, if you had asked me when, before his announcement that he wasn't vegan anymore, whether or not he's vegan, I would have said absolutely. I might have, had a little asterisk and said, like, I'm kind of watching out for some of his views because I think that they have some dangerous entailments. I still would have said that he's vegan. Now, whether he's still an active voice in the vegan movement, I mean, if his videos are still up, I know that he has an incredible reach. And if like the meat eater's case for veganism, or the one where he looked at, I think it was Lad Bible, and looked at the cognitive dissonance, it's called like the worst of cognitive dissonance or something like that. Like, if those videos are still up, I think that they're probably still convincing people to go vegan. So that's good. But I mean, the videos aren't living, breathing individuals, and I don't think that he's a prominent figure within the vegan movement because he's not in the vegan movement. He's not vegan. But this topic of whether non-vegans can advocate for veganism or can kind of push animal rights, like I don't know if this might be getting into a discussion about single issue campaigns, but I guess we'll see where it goes. Just to check in with the comments here. Jeremy says, I don't know whether I've whether I've said this online before, but I don't even know what necessary means in the moral context. Jeremy goes on to say, I understand giving up a whole lot, like sacrificing my own life, a family member's life, or having myself tortured for a large enough moral benefit, but I have no clue where some magic line between necessary and unnecessary would be. It's a very, I can tell that you reflected a lot on this topic, and whether some slice of vegan cheesecake is necessary or not is something we need to ask ourselves. I mean, we know that we cause harm with things that we do. And, like if there was a train track kind of trolley problem where somebody was like deciding to let the train, like make the train run over all the beings who eat things for sole gustatory pleasure alone, which end up killing maybe thousands, millions of insects and voles and other such animals. If you decided to pull that in order to run over the vegans eating cheesecakes for pleasure, then that could mean a lot of people get run over by the train. So I really think that we really need to think about the logical entailments and the criteria that we set for these trolley problem kind of things. Lee Dooley says, kind of like alcohol, crop debts though to make beer. Alcohol is purely pleasure. Yeah, I don't disagree at all. Jeremy had also added, in the vegan context, if a single one of us could end all non-human torture by starving only ourselves, we obviously ought to. I mean, I'm not going to encourage anybody to end their own life or to put their own health or well-being at risk. And yeah, I guess it's kind of a shame because it sounded like that's kind of the angle that Cosmic Skeptic was coming from all this time. That's why it's so surprising to me for him to just be like, no, I'm not vegan anymore, when he had like built up that clause so much in people's minds and was kind of appealing to people from a rationality perspective.
So say if they were turning, like, I don't know, a person vegan every day, you'd be okay with them killing an animal every day.
I don't know what you mean by okay with.
Well,
yeah.
well, if the alternative is you could kill them, but they wouldn't turn an extra person vegan each day.
If more animals were saved by a vegan activist eating meat and then turning a lot of people vegan, I think
that's your argument in favor of like letting somebody like Cosmic Skeptic live.
Well, just separately from the idea of letting Cosmic Skeptic live, I would want as little suffering as possible. If there's X amount of suffering, whatever I could do to make that X amount of suffering decrease, I would go for that. As far as Cosmic Skeptic goes, I think he's probably doing better than most meat eaters in the world as far as causing less suffering. And I don't know how comfortable I feel just having people die due to how the human brain works. And people are raised eating meat, and it takes them a while to be convinced that they should change. At one point, I ate meat, so I would hate for somebody to have killed me when I did. So it's hard for me to say somebody should die, especially Alex.
So, like, if you could look at this from the third person, you would wish if you could go back in time and choose to either still be alive now, or somebody could kill you and prevent who knows how many animals from dying, like say thousands. I don't know how old you are, but conceivably. Yeah, so conceivably, I think PETA did an analysis on this, and I think there's been a few others. Somewhere between 60 and 100 animals die per year for your average person on an average diet. So conceivably, by now, you could have saved thousands of animals if you had somebody kill you earlier on, right? So if you could look at like, I don't know, your life in the third person or look at an alternate dimension, you would prefer thousands of animal lives die just so that you could exist today as a vegan.
Correct. Well, first of all, I want to mention I said 38, but I'm 37. I don't know why I said that.
Well, after you get past a certain point, they all kind of blend together. But I want to respond to this comment from Jeremy. Each of us could save. In fact, Jeremy says each of us could, in fact, only save a few thousand animals. Not necessarily. I mean, you could save a lot more than that. You could save a lot more. And when I say save, I mean, what that really means when people say vegan save X number of animals per year is that really means that we're not paying for X number of animals to be bred into existence only to have their lives taken. So we're kind of saving future animals. Unfortunately, we're not really able to save the victims in factory farms right now. Jeremy goes on to say, in my hypothetical, I myself could save all the trillions. That's clearly worth more than my own life to me. I would say that I would say that you should value your life. And I think like we don't need to be martyrs. I think that if we are really passionate about saving animals and spreading veganism, that we need to be alive, we need to be healthy, and keeping ourselves going is important. Avoiding burnout, things like that. I mean, I can't tell you. I've been looking at different channels that I can reach out to do live streams with together, who have made animal rights related channels. I can't tell you how many channels I found that they have like, several thousand subscribers, but they haven't made a video in like a year. And it's just one of those things where you're like, why do people abandon a privileged position where they could be using their voice to advocate for non-human animals? Like, I understand sometimes maybe people run out of content ideas and things like that, but at the very least, you can just host a live stream every now and then and answer some questions or post some shorts, like look through your content and post some short videos or something like that. I think there's always things that we can be doing. And I think it's, as far as this whole topic goes, as far as like putting lives on a scale and things like that, I think it's a lot more helpful, not only for the perception of vegans by non-vegans, but also for our own mental health, to focus on the good that we can do, and the good that people who are currently doing bad can do, rather than focusing on the bad that they do and kind of like how we can get some kind of revenge or retribution or kind of dole out some kind of punishments about. Lee says, maybe I should switch to tequila or something. I watch how they harvest that. Doesn't seem like crop deaths though. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know some people also brew their own alcohol. I mean, if you trace everything back, ultimately you're going to find some harm and everything. And I mean, that might be some kind of appeal to futility, but I think it's also important to kind of live your life to some degree. And, you know, and since I don't hold the position that people who, for example, eat things for pleasure that cause animal deaths should be killed, I can say that.
I would not sacrifice myself for 1,000 animals or 1,000 humans. No.
Okay, you would. So just for you to be alive, you would want thousands of animals or humans to die.
Want's a strong word, but I would choose that over.
You would choose
myself.
that. Okay, yeah. So if
I try to be honest.
Let's So let's
would
change the no. Let's change the hypothetical. So let's say if the Holocaust never happened, but if the Holocaust never happened, you would not exist today. You'd be in favor of the Holocaust.
I don't want this to come across as specifically a specific Holocaust with a specific race of people, but 6 million people, I would not trade my life for 6 million people. No.
Okay, so there is a threshold.
I doubt there is. The threshold would be my loved ones. I would probably sacrifice myself for my kids, my wife, my mom, and my siblings. And aside from that, there's
so you would be in favor of the Holocaust happening if it ensured your existence.
Again, nothing about Jewish people, but yes, 6 million people. Yes, I would not sacrifice myself for 6 million. And if I was about to die,
no. I'm saying, like, let's say you were in this spirit realm.
Oh, never existed. Correct. I want to exist. Now that I know what my existence is and what I want in life, I would say right now that I choose existing more than I choose saving 6 million people.
So like, just so the hypothetical is clear, let's say you were in, I don't know, you got hit by a car, and God told you you're dead now, and you have two options. Either I can wipe you out of existence, so you're not going to go to heaven, hell, purgatory, anything. You just won't exist. Mm-hmm. Or I can ensure the Holocaust will happen, but you will get your old life back.
Jeremy brings up an interesting point that Jeremy says reasonable veganism is insufficiently clear about distinguishing psychological prediction from moral claims. I'd have to kind of meditate on that. But from what I gather, I think you're saying that kind of like maybe you're bringing up this kind of consequentialism, whereby if we were able to accurately predict and maybe surely accurately predict the consequences of our actions, how would that impact our moral decision making? One thing that kind of came to mind is, like, if you are at a restaurant and let's say you're like looking at the cake display thing behind the little glass at the counter, and there's like the number of animal deaths that each thing caused. Like, if we knew after the fact that something caused however many deaths, and thereby we could have a good idea of how many deaths it would cause in the future, if that would maybe impact our behavior. It's an interesting question. It would certainly impact my behavior.
Or I could make the Holocaust not happen, and then you'll be wiped out of existence. Like, what would you choose? You'd choose to go back to life, have the Holocaust occur.
It becomes a little more complicated when the element is added that, like, I'm dying of dying versus the sacrifice. I definitely would not sacrifice myself for a certain number of people.
Sure.
But coming back after a death, I honestly don't think I'd be able to choose. Damn. It's trickier. I can safely say I wouldn't sacrifice myself for others. I would risk my life. I would fight in the streets for people's rights, knowing there's a potential I'll live from it, but I would not press a button and end my life to save 1 billion people. As far as if I'm already dead and nobody like that I could trade for me did me wrong, I don't know if I'd swap out in that case. I'd probably just let myself get snapped out of existence.
Okay.
But not a personal sacrifice, no.
Okay.
And not by choice. I don't think I could get myself to do it. I don't think you would either. But we might think we would, and it's noble of us. I just don't think we would.
Okay.
Sorry, that was offensive.
Okay. So, right. All right. The factor.
I really hope that this conversation gets out of the morbid woods pretty soon. This is pretty intense here.
That would determine whether or not you'd be okay with allowing somebody. Well, the factor that you'd be okay with, say, sacrificing yourself is if you'd already be dead. But if you could actually go back in time and ensure you wouldn't exist to save thousands of others, you wouldn't be okay with it.
No, I wouldn't. No, I'd consider that a sacrifice because I would have to rewind time. Yeah.
Right. Okay. But you would think the same thing of somebody else. Like, say, if you knew that you could save thousands of animals by killing somebody, you wouldn't be in favor of doing that, even if you could get away with it, and nobody would know it's that political.
No, I wouldn't trade one for another. I think it's complicated in the world we have with trading one animal for another. But no, I wouldn't trade a person for other people. No.
Okay, so if you could kill Hitler, you would not do that because you could conceivably convince him to stop the Holocaust.
If I could kill Hitler, I mean, doing a whole timey-wimey thing where it's not going to affect anything and like butterfly effect. If I could magically know somebody was going to do horrible things and I could kill them before they did it, of course I would. Yeah.
So then you'd be in favor of killing Carnus.
I don't know if there was a specific debate proposition. I think what had happened was that Vegan Gains had seen a video that Carson had made about Joey Carbstrong's activism, and then kind of maybe wanted to talk about why Joey's activism wasn't extreme, and or why in his view Joey's activism isn't extreme, and then I think that kind of led to this whole cascade of topics from welfareism to single issue campaigns to reducitarianism, and then kind of this whole like speciesism, trolley problem, and that kind of thing. I'm going to read this comment from Contrarian. Contrarian says, being fully vegan may not guarantee least animal harm. Home garden production of food by a quasi-vegan may cause less harm than 100% vegan who uses complex supply chains to apply fully vegan food. I used to do, I used to kind of screen people for whether or not they should get a role in a certain Discord server to be able to do like host stages where non-vegans will come and ask questions. And I used to actually play the role of a non-vegan who lived like in some cabin and didn't buy processed foods and only went and just like fished for fishes and went to some farm by their house and got some eggs that had been discarded by chickens or something like that, and only ate animals who had died of old age and things like that. And I basically put the potential vegan outreacher in the position of having to justify like the idea of being a vegan in a city who's participating in complex supply chains, which contribute to monocrop agriculture and all this stuff. And I mean, I think that's why it's so important to view intentionality as something that's important, because I think it is very important. And I think that it's also important to look at scalability. And I think it's also important to look at the fact that a lot of times these are environmental types of discussions when we're talking about like the life that's possible to live one way or another. And it kind of takes it out of a rights violation kind of thing, because the intentionality is kind of a symmetry breaker in that vein. Literally says, seems like Joey's activism has calmed down a lot recently, and his recent long form campus discussions were really good. Yeah, I've really been enjoying Joey's stuff a lot. I enjoyed it in the past, and I still enjoy it. Jeremy Gord says, absolutely, it's crucial to understand my consequential position. Oh, they're talking. But I just want to read that. So it's not about the least harm that Jeremy alone might do. Interesting. So yeah, I think maybe Jeremy's also referring to scalability here, which I think we need to keep abreast in our minds.
If assuming nobody will find out that it's a politically motivated killing.
Yeah, I don't feel to that level with the animal situation. I don't like I was saying, if there was no society as in nature, I saw two people, one killed the other, I would kill the killer. I would need to figure out the details if I saw somebody killing an animal. If you were in nature and somebody killed an animal to eat it, you would kill them if you could get away with it?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So let me just try to make this clear, because I don't know if this is a contradiction or if you are finding the animal Holocaust to be less significant as the human Holocaust, like the Jewish Holocaust, because I thought I heard you say, yeah, I would kill Hitler because he's doing some horrible atrocity, and I know that killing Hitler would stop the Holocaust, but in the same vein, you wouldn't kill a meat eater who is contributing to the Holocaust. So are you saying that the animal Holocaust isn't as important to you as the human Holocaust?
Correct. Based on the idea that I assume animals have less of a desire to live or will to live outside of instinct. I think it's complicated. I think we should not kill or harm animals and leave them to.
This is interesting because from what Carson's saying, it sounds like he's thought about this a lot. Something that comes to mind is when my girlfriend was driving down the road somewhat recently, she drove by a very, very large turtle, and the turtle was crossing the road, and she was fearful that the turtle could get hit. So she actually pulled over, and as she was getting out of her car, she saw in her rear view that somebody swerved. She said that it seemed intentional, like in order to hit the squirrel. She saw this in her rear view, like in her side mirror, I think. And then basically she saw the turtle go flying, like, well in front of the car out into a field or something. And presumably dying. And like, when she was appalled by it and really, really emotional. And, I was really sad when I heard about it too. But that being said, if she had told me that that was a human, like there was a human who was lying in the road and she was pulling over to stop, it's pulling over to check on that human, and that somebody had swerved and like run over that person's neck and feet or something. I would probably would have been much more in the forefront of my mind until now. And that's not because I think that humans have more of a will to live than turtles. I think that's because we all have this kind of speciesism with which, we've been raised, and that we're still trying to kind of see past. And I think that kind of gets back to what Vegan Gains was saying earlier about how we as humans kind of already trivialize animal suffering so much. So I do appreciate that he's advocating for the anti-speciesist position. And I'd be interested to talk to Carson about this a little bit, if it's a position that he truly holds, that humans like have a greater want to live than non-humans
in nature. But I would say, with my knowledge of what humans are, I don't have to, but I do have a higher level of respect for the life of humans, all else considered. Yeah.
Okay, so
Carson here says maybe we evolved to value our kin. Yeah, I think that's not outside the realm of possibility.
Great difference that you see in humans and animals that would make an animal holocaust less bad than a human holocaust would be their will to live. They don't have as much of an interest in living, according to you? Or
I don't know if they do, but yes. And just for fun, because you brought that up, I would say if I could make an equal amount of suffering from animals disappear as an equal amount of suffering from humans, I'd probably treat it somewhat equal if I didn't.
Yeah, so Carson isn't making a claim, I guess, in terms of saying that non-human animals have less of a desire to live.
No, either, because if I magically knew it was equal amounts of suffering, that wouldn't change things. But a life being magically taken out of existence, as of now, with my knowledge, I would have to assume that a cow doesn't think tomorrow I'm going to hang out with my cow buddy. And that doesn't mean that it should not have rights to not have its life taken. But compared to a human that might feel how I feel with how badly I want to continue living, that's the detail I'm going off of now. Yeah.
Okay, so if everybody in the Holocaust could be replaced with people who had, say, a similar level of interest in living in the future compared to your average animal like a cow or chicken, you would say that would be morally equivalent.
Would I say it would be morally? If it's morally equivalent, then I would say it would be morally equivalent. Yes.
Well, no. I'm saying if human beings had a similar interest in living in the future compared to your average animal.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, so what Vegan Gains is doing is basically like trait equalizing the human and non-human with regard to will to live.
The animal holocaust would be morally equivalent to the human holocaust.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand. I think I've proven my point that, yeah, you are trivializing animal deaths. And that's why you see Joey's activism as extreme. Because I just don't see how you could have the same opinion if this were a human rights issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think this necessarily connects to the Joey thing, because I, like Joey and like you, think that animals should not be killed. But I do want to ask you a question because of something you just said. If there was a burning building and there were two 20-year-olds in there, and one was just, let's say, had a mind very similar to yours, and the other one was a severely mentally challenged person that we can say they basically have no will to live and no thought of the future, would you not choose immediately?
Yeah, I if I had to choose who lives, who dies, I'd choose.
I'm not sure if Carson's conflating like being mentally challenged with not having a will to live. I don't think that a lack of intelligence is causative or even necessarily related to a lack of like life, willingness.
Choose the person who could benefit the most from living. But like again, that's not really the point I'm making. The point I'm making is, if you were to come across somebody in the street who was contributing to a human holocaust, and all they told you was, I'm killing like probably like 100 or so human beings per year. Yeah. Maybe I'll just cut it down a little bit and kill maybe like 50, 60.
Yeah.
I think the way you would react is, you are a disgusting fucking person who is murdering. I have a take really hard time fucking.
I would take them out to dinner, and you should as well, because we're talking about a world where it's legally acceptable. You want them to stop.
Well, look, if I don't even know why it matters if it's legally acceptable. The Holocaust was legally acceptable. I don't think if you were to have a dinner with Himmler, who was saying, like, we should wipe out all the Jews, and you could somehow talk him down to, well, let's just wipe out 70%, you would in any way pat him on the back. I think you would try to fight for the rights of those remaining 30% and say, there's absolutely no fucking way you should kill any of them.
I would do both. Oh man, I just lost what I was going to say.
I don't see how you can do both, because you're trivializing the lives of those remaining 30% and saying, well, that's good, because those 70% don't really need to live. But, it's great that you're letting those 30%, you're trivializing those lives. I don't see how you could concurrently argue for both. That, if you're going to reduce, that's great, but you should really, stop. We're talking about fucking lives.
Yeah. So there's a handful of different things that go into this. Part of it's just how humans work in general. But let's take something like circumcision. That's one of the biggest topics to me. I think that needs to end immediately. And I know people that are in my family, close people to me, that have their kids circumcised. And a thing that I think should be illegal. Horrible thing to do. I'd compare it to like tribal tattoos on the face or something.
Yeah, I think parents who do that to their kids should be incarcerated.
It's for ritualistic reasons or for cultural reasons and certain.
Yeah, exactly. But I still see those people daily, and I don't look at them and go, I'm disgusted by you. I have to live my life, be normal with them, and try to convince as many people as possible to stop cutting off baby dicks. And
so
I do the same.
You're talking about something different. You're talking about completely. Well, you're talking about a situation where you're completely burning the bridge with people versus the actual activism that you do. You can have a hard stance that you should never ever circumcise a child unless it's like there's a medical reason behind it, and not burn the bridge with that person. That's totally different than having this position where you shouldn't circumcise children, but if you're gonna have another kid, maybe like you should just consider circumcising him. If you don't, that's great, but you don't have to listen to me. Like that's a totally different thing.
Something that I just wanted to mention is, from what I've seen in the U.S. legal code, there are actually exemptions for human rights violations when it pertains to things like child abuse, where it's said, if it's done for, I'm not quoting this letter of the law, exactly here, but basically it's something like if you're doing it for religious reasons, or maybe it just says, as pertaining to circumcision, that it's that this I guess legal status of child abuse, etc., does not reign over that act, which I think is atrocious. Like, it's atrocious that people have made these exceptions. Same with bestiality laws. There are exemptions for animal farming. And just a side note, a lot of people talk about the dairy industry and talk about the sexual exploitation and violence that happens to mothers in the dairy industry, but that's the case for a lot of different industries where animals are farmed. Like, I think it happens to turkeys. I think it happens to pigs. And I think it's definitely something that we should be using when we talk to non-vegans, because these animals are being bred into existence. Like the whole, crop deaths and all that stuff that non-vegans use, it almost kind of ignores the fact that we wouldn't need to be feeding these animals anything in the first place if we weren't breeding them into existence. And I think if we also emphasize how disgusting it is, the way that we're essentially sexually molesting them in order to get their populations up, if we brought that up, I think we'd fare a lot better than getting really into the woods of crop death type topics. Legally says, my baby boy is 1 year old. He was not circumcised. Good for you. What a disaster. Same thing. I know very reasonable people on the left who have done it on their kids. Our nephew got a terrible infection. Yeah. And I've even heard of kids dying from it, from shock. I've seen the apparatus on which babies are mutilated, and basically like their hands are up. They're like strapped into something and their legs are strapped down. Sometimes I guess they're given like a lollipop or something, because sugar just activates like dopamine and things like that in their brain, where they just get like this rush, and that's supposedly some type of anesthetic measure for them. I mean, it's totally unnecessary in like 99.9% of cases. And it's really, really telling that it's done to babies when they're not able to fight back and resist. Like, if people thought that it was something that's so harmless and, something that's normal, blah, 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 why wouldn't they just let men pick what they want done to themselves? Yeah, it's awful. And it's also very kind of interesting that it's become such a taboo topic when females are concerned, female humans, like of baby girls. There are cultures in the world that mutilate baby girls when they're born. And in the US, I believe that's become illegal now. Whereas, hi, Rooted Sunshine. Whereas as far as baby boys are concerned, it's literally exempted from child abuse laws in the US. I think that, if there's somebody who's beating their kids and things like that, that person would be subject to legal punishment. They might have to go to jail. They might lose their kids, that kind of thing. But you can literally cut healthy tissue off of your defenseless, helpless baby and get a pat on the back and have doctors tell you, oh, you're helping to mitigate their future disease risk and things like that. And of course, these are surgeries that doctors make money on. And in a lot of cases, I think they're going to push them, whether they're beneficial for babies or not. And of course, we know that there's like a condition called thymosis, for example. I think that's what's called, where it might kind of be a potential solution, but even in that case, I mean, there are other things. There are a lot of non-surgical options that someone can use if they're experiencing that. I can't think of anything else. And it's really ridiculous when people talk about things like preventing cancer and things like that. I mean, yeah, if you chop off your earlobe, guess what? You're not going to get earlobe cancer. Like, no shit. It's not a good reason to chop your ear off, your earlobe. Legally says basically every major health organization in the world says do not circumcise except for, you guessed it, the USA. Yeah, it's quite atrocious what's done in the USA and how normalized it's become. And I know that people around the world look at Americans, us Americans, and say like, not to imply that you're American, I just mean like Americans, including myself, as I don't know where you're from, but yeah, they say what is up with Americans, and rightfully so.
You're talking about burning a bridge versus, doing this welfare activism and abolitionist activism at the same time. I don't think you can at the same time. There's no way you can have a conversation with somebody where you say, oh, pat them on the back. That's great that you're only, killing half the amount of people or animals that you were before. But then at the same time say, but you should really, stop killing entirely.
So now they're back to the welfareism and abolitionism discussion. So I'll be listening kind of carefully here because this is hopefully what Carson and I will talk about for a great deal of our talk on Monday. So just to kind of recap, they talked a lot about welfareism. Then they went into like single issue campaigns. I think then they went toward the topic of reducitarianism. And then Vegan Gains was doing kind of like a reductio about kind of allowing X number of deaths to occur, kind of like signing off on it. It was kind of this like utilitarian calculus thing that frankly it was quite uncomfortable for me to listen to, not for any reason pertaining personally to Richard or to Carson, but just because it's kind of like it's a little bit of like it's a morbid tangent that I'm not sure is so relevant, but as someone mentioned earlier, I think these hypotheticals and things like that are good for getting clear on our positions, but it can just be a little bit of like a I don't know, morbid topic for the lack of a better word. So let's kind of continue along and listen to if this goes in a direction of welfareism versus abolition here.
If you're going to trivialize the lives of those people or animals, where you say, oh, well, that's great that you're reducing, you can't trivialize their lives and argue for not trivializing their, like, I just see that as a contradiction. Either all of those lives matter or they don't.
No, they matter, and that's how much they matter to me. They matter that I have to think of what do I think is the most likely thing to cause the least amount of suffering and to get us to this world that I think is the best world, and I take that approach with it. So let me bring something to you that might make this come a little more clear, because I in a message you had sent me, I don't think I understood your position on animal rights violations anyways. So if you take something like the element of crop deaths that is rodenticides, poisons are put out, rats come and get it, they have a slow, agonizing death, bleeding out. Now, I don't think this is a reason to not be vegan, but if you had a plate full of sliced up apples and there was a certain amount of suffering that came from the rodents dying in rodenticides, and then you had a plate with a steak on it, and let's say in this magical hypothetical, the steak and the apple are identical nutrients. There's no difference, but one took killing an actual cow to get that steak, and one was the apples and the rodents, and we knew that the suffering was, let's call it doubled, or let's say tripled. The amount of suffering that came from these rodents to get this apple was 3 times the amount of suffering and life ending that it took to get this steak.
Okay, so Carson's asking this hypothetical where there's like multiple lives, and I realize that you guys can hear, so I'm not just recapping for the sake of recapping, but more so, I guess, like it introduces an interesting topic regarding whether or not a rat is capable of suffering more than a cow, maybe. So I'm interested to see if they what Vegan Gains would say if it kind of goes in the direction of like X number of rats versus 1 cow kind of thing. Carson's kind of using the crop deaths though as a he's going in a different direction than I thought he would go, because I thought he was going to go in the direction of rights violations being perpetrated upon the animals killed in crop production, but maybe he is going in that direction. I guess let's see.
Which one's the more moral thing to do, and also which one's the more vegan thing to do if you had to eat one?
Yeah, the apple.
No bullshit. No way.
Yeah, no, it would be the apple, because in the steak situation, you are taking away the rights
funny.
of another being, whereas the apple situation, you're not violating their rights. Their deaths are a result of them violating the rights of, say, the farmer for trying to take their food.
Okay, so Vegan Gains is just stepping out right out the gate. He's just squashing the crop deaths appeal, I guess, with this appeal to like kind of defending your crops, which when you think about it, I mean, if you're defending crops that you need to survive, would make sense. So, I mean, I don't know. I think I was thinking about this earlier today. I think that's one of the really good, besides just intentionality, it's a really good argument when it comes to crop deaths. I mean, some people will also argue that vegans do intentionally kill non-human animals in the defense of crops. For example, like not just preventative uses of things like pesticides, which maybe kill animals who come onto the fields. I know some people also talk about how vegans will or not vegans rather, but farmers who grow crops will like shoot animals who try to come on the fields and eat the crops and things like that. And I think that it's really unfortunate, and it's something that I hope that as we get closer toward a vegan world, we have farmers who are taking measures to maybe grow a little extra and feed some to the other animals. I mean, I don't think that we should be violent toward other animals if we can help it, especially if we can be healthy eating whatever is grown. Lee Dooley says, what do you think about the nutrivore lifting vegan logic argument that crop deaths, though, isn't even a good argument because the burden of proof is on the carnist to show crop fields entail more death than wild field? I've heard something similar before. It I guess it sounds to me like a little bit of a false dichotomy, because a field can be neither a crop field nor a wild field. I mean, we could just turn a field into a parking lot. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if maybe it also matters, like, if it's kind of like a post hoc kind of consideration where it's like, okay, this has already been turned into a crop field. What do we do with it now versus leveling a parking lot. Regarding the Jeremy has a comment regarding the thing about, I guess, feeding the animals who could maybe be found on fields eating our crops that are grown for humans. Jeremy says the problem there is that when you grow extra to account for efficient pests, they multiply faster until you're forced to kill more. That's an interesting consideration. I mean, it's kind of very much like the quote unquote spay and neuter kind of thing. And that's not an easy topic. And the really kind of challenging thing is that we kind of have to come up with solutions for this. Unfortunately, it's difficult to know where we stand on a lot of these things, but I think ultimately, if we don't, then either whatever the status quo is continues, or we come up with better solutions. It's kind of like the plastic problem. I mean, the amount of plastic that's being manufactured has spiked so ridiculously in the last several decades, and it's only going to ramp up through who knows how long. It's one of those things where it's like we have this problem of something going out of control, yet like what can we practically do for the world? And the people who are responsible for implementing a lot of policies, unfortunately, just follow their donors' wishes. So it's definitely a challenge to come up with where we would stand on these, let alone get them implemented. Lee Dooley says, I usually go more on an Earthling Ed approach that as vegans, we have to live in a non-vegan food system. If we move to a vegan world, we would farm differently to mitigate crop deaths. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've heard kind of asked to vegans as a challenge is like, how many of us are actually trying to mitigate, or I guess talking to farmers, or like trying to find out how many deaths we're causing, how many crop deaths we're causing with our different food choices. And I think that might be a worthwhile project, honestly, for some vegans to look at the different plant-based foods, which, we eat. When I say we, I just mean people who eat a plant-based diet, and figure out which ones are actually causing the most death, and definitely take action such that we're not contributing to those industries as much as we can. Vogon Poetry, first message I've seen from them, welcome, says, I saw a video once where they prevented elephants raiding crops and the resultant consequences to elephants by offering up a share of their crops. That's a case. Well, yeah, I've seen a video of an elephant actually stopping this like wagon or this truck rather, that's like full of sugarcane. And I guess there's laws in place in whatever place this was where you can't hit an elephant with a car. So the elephants have apparently learned to exploit this by walking out in front of cars. And then they basically, after the car stops, they just grab some sugar cane, they grab a snack, and then they walk away. I thought that was really cute. And I think it's really smart of the elephants also. And it seemed like the sugarcane people, they weren't begrudgingly participating. I mean, I couldn't see anyone in the car, but it looked like they stopped very respectfully. They let the elephant come and take something, and then the elephant walked away. You'll see, like in places like Turkey, for example, there's a very high wild cat population. There's you can go to parks where there's just dozens of cats walking around a park, and the municipality in some areas have actually put little stations, like little shelters and little feeding stations, and they kind of the cats kind of live harmoniously with the people in the city. So it kind of reminded me of that a little bit too.
Well, okay, describe rights violation.
By the way, okay, so a rights violation would say, I guess we could classify it as taking away the freedoms or liberties or ownership from somebody else.
And I just want to say, as a quick side note, something I've heard Carson talk about in a video recently, kind of talking about the welfareism topic, was with regard to cow legs. And his question was something like, if there was a farm that you knew was like cutting off legs of cows before killing them or something like that, would you advocate or not advocate for the cessation of the leg chopping off kind of thing? And it's an interesting kind of like welfareist reductio. So Carson, if you're still listening, hopefully we can talk about that. It's something that I'm going to have to put a little bit more thought into, TBH. But yeah, I wanted to also put that out there, that it's kind of a little bit of a similar topic here. Jeremy says, I just checked, in South Korea has its highest circumcision rate outside of Israel and Islamic nations. Interesting. I would not have expected that, but thank you. I just got a wrinkle in my brain because I just learned something.
So if I were to steal your clothes, if I were to hit you in some way, if I were to kill you, those are all rights violations. So in the one case, say like the farmer's property being their crops, if they have to, say, lay out poison to protect their crops, it's the rodents that are violating their rights, and it's the farmers that are protecting their property rights from those rodents. And by the way, if we're going to use this like rodenticide poison thing specifically, I don't know if that's commonly used anywhere other than Australia. And those mouse plagues actually affect livestock as well. They leave out poisons in the meat industry.
I like the tone that this conversation has taken now. They're being very civil and respectful. Not to say they weren't earlier, but like I think this is like a really good cadence for these two guys. And I'll see you later, Lee Dooley. Thanks for stopping by on the stream. Ralph asks, have you seen any good movies lately? I have the one and only Ivan, but haven't watched it yet. I haven't seen that. What's a good movie? I saw The Lorax. I had never seen The Lorax before. I watched it with my girlfriend. I loved it. I want like all kids to see that, because it's about like, I don't want to spoil it, but I don't think I would. There's like, it's just about like protecting like nature, basically. Maybe that's a good way to put it without spoiling it. So if you haven't seen The Lorax, I'd watch The Lorax. There's also a movie called Wall-E, which I watched recently. And I realized these are both kind of like kids movies. My girlfriend and I, we like to watch kids movies a lot. So yeah, I like those two. What was another movie? Oh, okay. So now, Ralph says, do you like Lord of the Rings? I've never seen any Lord of the Rings movies. I actually hadn't seen any of the Harry Potter movies until like maybe 8 or 9 months ago. But now I've seen all of them. My girlfriend introduced me to all the Harry Potter movies, and I was like eagerly like being like, can we watch, like, are we gonna watch Harry Potter tonight, or do you watch Harry Potter tonight? I grew to really enjoy and appreciate it. And apparently there's a vegan actress in it too. I believe her name is Ivana Lynch. And she was recently in this like kind of like really, really short film where like she was like in this like spaceship or something like that. If you haven't seen that, I definitely recommend checking that out. But I was gonna say another movie that I saw somewhat recently, which definitely wasn't a kid's movie and was very, very, very heavy, was called The Whale. And it was I forget the name of the lead actor in it, but it was a very emotionally heavy movie. And but it was like very kind of jarring in a good way. And if you kind of like those kind of intense movies, I believe it was even an independent film, but that would be something that you could potentially enjoy if you like kind of heavy emotional movies. Jeremy says, Ivana has also been vegan podcasting for a while. Oh, interesting. maybe I could. Yeah, Brendan Fraser. Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, maybe I could get Ivana to come on the channel. I think that might help my subscriber count, which, by the way, broke 300. So yippee yippee, and hopefully it'll just keep growing. I mean, I've had this channel, by the way, for like, I think I started this account like about 11 years ago. And I think my first video that I posted was like maybe like 6 years ago. But I've gotten more active on YouTube lately, and seen a corresponding growth. So kind of just like, my channel's not big by any means at all, but it kind of just shows that if you put more videos up, generally speaking, it'll affect your subscriber count for the better. So something to keep in mind if anyone's feeling discouraged. Just keep putting stuff out there
for those rodents.
So yeah, and I don't need to use it as a specific, this is what we need to stop doing, but mostly just to see where we are as far as how we feel. I can't, with the reason I'm vegan, the reason I think that we should not make animals suffer, should not end their lives, I cannot see how, even if there's a distinction with rights violations, that you could say, and let's ignore the idea of plagues and all this other thing, just the idea of causing suffering and dead animals, that you could say that you would rather eat the food that would cause more suffering.
Well, let me give you a hypothetical. So let's say you needed to well, we can use the same hypothetical, essentially. Let's say you have a human steak and only one human died, so it's human meat on a plate. And on the other plate, you have a loaf of bread. And with the loaf of bread, there happened to be a horrible accident where 3 workers on this field ended up dying due to malfunction of machine equipment. What's more ethical, eating the bread or eating the steak?
Gotcha.
Okay, so there's this idea of demand here. Like, what does the demand for the human steak signal versus what does the demand for the bread, which resulted in some incidental deaths, signal? Jeremy says, "Wow, this is completely ridiculous." It's definitely it's in the world of hypotheticals. You often hear a lot of things that sound kind of outlandish. So I think I know where Vegan Gains is coming from, and I think he's trying to get that intentionality kind of into the conversation here.
We can also change it too, so that it's not, say, just an incidental thing. Let's say that we were at war with another tribe or culture of people, and these people were trying to steal all of our food. Now, the farmer who is trying to, grow this wheat so that he can sell it at the market needs to protect his field, and he had to shoot 3 people who were trying to destroy the entire field. What would be the more ethical, food option, the bread or, the human steak?
I'm sorry, I might have missed part of it. So there were humans trying to destroy the field.
Hey, that was a little fast. Okay, so basically, I guess Reasonable Vegans recapping it, so I guess I don't need to recap it here.
When you killed them, and you could be eating them, and then
no. What I'm saying is, I gave you 2 different hypotheticals. They both mean the same thing essentially. So more death occurred to produce the bread versus the human meat steak. But I think the second hypothetical maybe made more sense because it's something that would kind of normally happen or occur.
Okay, so this is kind of like the consequentialism injected into utilitarianism perspective versus the principle deontological kind of like future demand signaling kind of perspective
over time. But let's say we're at war with another culture of people. These people were trying to destroy our fields or steal from these fields that we couldn't sell the bread to our culture of people. If the farmer for each loaf of bread, say, had to kill 2 people to produce a loaf of bread to protect his crop from this other invading culture, would eating human meat steaks be more ethical than eating the bread?
Yeah, I think part of it would come down to the legal system.
Well, we're talking about morality. It doesn't really matter what's written in the books. I'm just asking you, what do you think would be more moral?
Gotcha.
Because in the one sense, I think the farmer is doing something perfectly ethical, which is protecting his property. If that results in death, then that's the fault of the people violating the rights, not his.
Yeah, I don't see a reason to appeal to legality in this case. I mean, you could equalize it whether where it's illegal or legal in either case, and I think the hypothetical would still be unaffected either way. They'd kind of cancel out, like when you're doing division, you just like kind of cancel numbers out.
Versus you are taking the rights away from a human being in a systematic fashion.
What if the people that he was protecting the farm from had no clue they were doing anything wrong?
Yeah, I wouldn't care. Same thing.
Interesting.
So we can apply this principle. If you think it changes the action, if they know what they're doing is wrong. If somebody was committing rape and they didn't know it was wrong, do you think the woman would have a right to use lethal force to stop herself from getting raped?
I would consider rape a bad action, where the action of the rats trying to eat the crops and then not realizing humans claim that land as property, I would not consider that a wrong action. If I went to crops to take the food from the crops and there was like an alien species that it was their crops because they also live here and they went to kill me, I don't know exactly what that would mean, but I do know that it would mean that I didn't do anything wrong. But maybe
you personally don't have to be doing anything wrong from your perspective to violate somebody else's rights. So like, again, if I was under mind control and I had no control over my own body. And
so I guess just to pause for a sec, I don't think that the animals who are eating the crops that are being grown for humans are necessarily violating our rights. So I think maybe that's something that might have gotten kind of missed within the discussion here. But I think it's still an interesting topic.
Person controlling my mind forced me to rape a woman. I'm not really the one. I'm not necessarily doing anything wrong, but I am violating. But the other person's rights are being violated. But I can't be held responsible. I think that's what you're trying to.
Well, what I'm trying to point out, and let's have the steak be a rat steak to make it easier. If you have 5 rats coming after food you're growing, and you kill those rats to feed somebody that food, when there's another rat that's just hanging out, not trying to take any food, and you could kill that rat to feed somebody that rat. If the equal food is going to come from the food that you killed the 5 rats to get, or killing that one rat, and all the rats involved did nothing intentionally wrong, they're just wrong place, wrong time, being on the side that would be in favor of killing extra rats when there's no rat that did anything to deserve it, does not make any sense to me.
Yeah, there may be a threshold where I'd say, okay, if you could choose to kill one rat in some sort of systematic fashion where we're taking away the rights of rats in order to eat, versus for each loaf of bread, you have to kill like 1 million rats. The proportions may be so far off that I'd favor systematically killing a rat for like food, just because, again, just the sheer amount of deaths are so outweighed. But in a real life circumstance, I have not seen any evidence that like there's such a huge disproportion of animals dying in, say, a field versus an animal that is raised for.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the threshold part where deontology is concerned, and reasonable vegan seems to be very kind of like, at least as far as this hypothetical goes, very decidedly on the utilitarian side. So it's like intentionality and those kinds of things don't seem to factor into it, whereas the number of deaths would be kind of more paramount in his view.
Me that it would justify systematically taking away the rights of animals.
I'm not saying there's either
a greater amount of rights.
I'm not saying there is either, but I think it's good for us to know where we would stand on that. So I think it's worth looking over. But the fact that it's at random is what blows my mind. So let's say it's 100. So it's a lot, but it's not the threshold you're talking about. You think it would make sense that, like, you personally, if you had a field, you would kill 100 rats that were just being natural and doing their thing and trying to eat from the field. You'd kill 100 rats to produce the amount of food that maybe one rat, if you just killed and ate the rat, that one rat could produce. The idea of it being morally acceptable to kill 100 of the same sized, same getting joy out of life, same amount of suffering rats, when nobody knew they were doing a violation issue. A human breaking into a house to steal stuff, you could say, this is my property, they came in to steal my stuff, I had to protect my stuff, whatever. But in this other case, they're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about a 100-to-1 ratio.
Jeremy brings up a really, really good point regarding threshold deontology. Make sure you guys understand that consequentialism over rights is not deontology. That's a really, really good point. And it's kind of it's something that actually Akash and I are going to hopefully get to talk about when we have our next discussion, which I believe is on Thursday, where we're going to talk about this idea that he actually brought this up, which is, it's pretty brilliant, that these, whether we're talking about deontology and consequentialism, the deontological approach, I believe what he was kind of saying was that the deontological approach kind of looks at the consequences kind of almost like unintentionally, in a way where it's almost kind of impossible to divorce our ideas of what's principled or what's immoral from our knowledge of what the consequences of different actions are, and also kind of like, as far as the ontology, or consequentialism is concerned, there's this idea that we have, I guess what he was kind of saying is that when you look from a consequentialist perspective, you're kind of looking at consequences from a principled perspective, so to speak. So, but I want to read what Jeremy wrote more carefully here. Deontology focuses on constraints over you, the agent yourself, not maximizing the rights respecting that other people do. That's interesting. Yeah, that's how I understand it too. And I think that's important to say here. In a general sense, it pertains to what you're willing to do or not willing to do. And I think that applying that to a lot of different questions, like, trolley-like questions, which is kind of what it seems like their discussion is back into now, can kind of help bring clarity.
I don't know exactly where the numbers would lie, but once you're starting to get around like single-digit differences, like 2, 3 versus 1, I don't feel comfortable again with the idea of systematically taking away the rights of a class of animal or human.
Do you guys want to listen to this at the normal speed for just a second and just kind of like really just feel the discussion, just pretend we're there. It's just like, let's just see what it was like.
Just for the sake of the idea of reducing overall death or suffering. The rights seem to matter more to me.
Very chill, very academic. All right, let's get back to 1.75 here.
Like again, I can make a similar example where, let's say 10 men were raping one woman. You could either kill all 10 men to prevent that rape, or you could allow that woman to be raped and everybody lives. Like, I'd rather just murder all of them.
Yeah, no, I would
say
do
that. So like,
well, not even just rather. I'd rather take out all 10 than 9 of them.
Well, that's what I said. I'd rather kill all of them than have a situation where everybody lives. Like, even if they were under mind control, I think I knew that they weren't doing. They didn't know what they were doing. I think I might even still. So I would
do the same if it was 10 men raping a sheep.
I'm not a utilitarian, so I don't think entirely on this idea that, okay, well, let's just look at what causes the least amount of suffering. I think more from a rights-based approach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a utilitarian when it comes to animals in our current society where the legal system is not on their side. I'm not a utilitarian in principle or on when it comes to humans, especially, but probably just not even in principle at all. If the law were on one side, I wouldn't kill a cow to save 100 cows. But if it had to happen within a system where the law is not on their side, I would take that number difference.
I don't get how the legal, like the property status of animals basically would influence a person's like principle or amount of moral consideration that they afford to other beings. I'll have to talk to Carson about that.
Okay, but you wouldn't do that for a human in a human context, would you?
No, same thing. I would not sacrifice a human for another human. Trolley car problem. I don't switch it over.
No, I mean, like, say if humans didn't have.
And I want to say, like, regarding legality, I see the benefit in keeping in mind that the carnists who are paying for animal exploitation, etc., are doing so knowing that it's legal, and I mean that can influence, I guess, their willingness to participate in it. But I don't see the point in bringing legality into the picture when we're talking about our moral belief systems. Jeremy says, too many vegans are under the misconception that deontology is stronger when it's actually usually much weaker. Abolitionism is a straightforwardly consequentialist position. Wow. I'm going to have to think about that a lot. And hopefully, Jeremy, when Carson and I have our talk about abolitionism and welfarism, you can hopefully join that. I think we had scheduled it for Monday, this coming Monday at 2 p.m. Central. So just about 3 hours before this live stream started, but on Monday.
Right. So like Jews, Nazi Germany.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we're in society. I mean, I clearly would do what I thought I could get away with. If I knew I could get away with it and somebody was killing somebody and I could kill the killer, I would do it. The main reason would be for my own protection. If I knew somebody was willing to kill a human, I would want to take them out so they weren't likely to kill me. And yeah, I think I would just do it anyways, as far as I think that they did this horrible thing. But I don't think we're born with like any natural rights. Rights are just something that
they have to be granted.
Yeah, exactly. They have to be granted. And that's why we started society to get protection from.
I'm just wondering why you use a utilitarian approach if
that's look at that philosopher pose by Carson. That's pretty awesome. That should be like a statue or something. The idea that rights are granted and that we're not naturally born with them. I pretty much subscribe to the same thing. I think I've heard somebody say that makes me a moral anti-realist or something, but I'm not really sure on that. But regardless, I think it's a really good idea to behave as though rights are essentially, quote unquote, God-given, even though, we know that they just have to be basically respected. Like, I don't think that somebody can be given rights by another person. So maybe I do disagree with Carson and Richard on this in saying that rights have to be granted. I think that rights can be taken away, but I don't think that they can be granted.
The idea behind your animal rights activism would be to grant them rights, right?
Well, because there's legally an amount of suffering that is allowed to happen, which is whatever the extent is right now. And the utilitarian approach would be cutting that down. And that seems like in a most important thing. I mean, I'd look at humans the same way in a real world situation.
So just to be clear, the reason you would just do anything you could to reduce their suffering and have this utilitarian approach where, say, you'd kill one cow to save 100 cows in a factory farm is just because they don't have any rights anyway. So like, there's no way for you to commit some kind of action to grant them rights, something like that.
Something like that, I think.
So they don't have any rights anyway. So the only strategy you would have in a situation where they don't have rights is to just be a welfarist, and just however way you can reduce their suffering, you'd be in favor of it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean,
one thing that kind of comes to mind here is whether the familiarity, I guess, that would need to be present between humans to whatever degree and the non-human, like if there was a cow who somehow had rights versus Akash, I don't have a conversation planned with Jeremy, but if Jeremy wants to have a conversation, I'd also welcome that. But I do have one planned with Carson, and I think that the statements from Jeremy about abolitionism could be something that would be helpful there, and his ideas about it would be helpful. Regarding this, like I think what I understand is like if there's a cow who had been granted rights versus like animals who hadn't been granted rights, I think Carson's saying that maybe you'd value the life of the one granted rights more. I wonder if I understand it correctly. I wonder if like there would be some kind of familiarity bias at play there. Kind of like, not too unlike what happens with our companion animals.
Aside from it's not what you would preach on the street, would you not, like in your own mind?
Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable killing a cow to save 100 cows, whether they have rights or not. Same with a human being.
Like, what if you were at a factory and there's like thousands of cows at this factory, and the guy that owned the factory just wanted to mess with you, but he was being honest, and he said, "We're about to kill these 100 over here, but this one that we weren't going to kill that can just go and live in a sanctuary. If you decide to have us kill that one instead, we'll kill this one, and these other 100 will go off to a sanctuary. But if you don't want us to kill this one that was not going to die, you can just take it home with you, take it to your sanctuary. But then these other 100 would die. Would you not do the utilitarian calculation in that specific instance?"
Right. I don't know if I feel comfortable negotiating with a genocidal, Holocaust perpetrator like that. Like, again, in a human context, if it were a Jewish Holocaust and somebody gave you that same ultimatum, would you negotiate?
I wouldn't do it with humans. I feel that it's different.
Yeah. So
maybe
I would like you to I would just like you to name the trait then. Like name the trait that's lacking in animals that's lacking in human.
Name the trait has entered the discussion again.
Beings, you would make that sort of negotiation with a Holocaust perpetrator.
So two things. I think what pushes me over the edge on this is in the animal case, not knowing for sure exactly what their will to live, want for the future is, and me knowing with humans. And I think I just base it on myself. If I had less of a will to live myself, then maybe I wouldn't view it differently. But I wouldn't want to be chosen in that way. I wouldn't want somebody to let me die to save the 100, and so I wouldn't want to put that on another human, since I know how my species works to some extent. But doesn't it feel right? I know you don't want to deal with a Holocaust person, whatever, but doesn't it feel like the right thing to do would be to save the 100 cows, even though we care about cows?
Yeah, like if they're.
So I guess it's interesting that it sounds like what Carson's saying is that the reason he would negotiate with that person is because he's somewhat agnostic about the will of the animals to live. It's an interesting position. It seems like a position that somebody could take if they just kind of want to stop themselves from really like morally judging carnists, basically, and just saying like, well, yeah, like, those animals might not have wanted to live anyway. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'll have to definitely think about that.
All gonna die anyway.
Let's say they're not.
What do you mean?
So these ones are not all going to die anyways. This guy is really wealthy, but he just loves having this factory farm. And he has decided that either 100 of them are going to go home with you because you have a huge sanctuary, or one is going to go home with you and you have that sanctuary. And whichever one you don't take, those ones end up going to slaughter and getting eaten and all that stuff.
I'm not entirely understanding the hypothetical.
So this factory farm has
two options.
You got to this factory farm. The guy's all like, these 100 I was just about to slaughter and send off to be eaten, and I'm going to give you a chance to take these 100 with you to your sanctuary. But if you take them, I'm going to kill this one that I was going to let go free to a sanctuary. So you got to swap out an individual cow that, to whatever degree, wants to live and not be harmed, to save 100 based on what we know about cows.
Sure. I don't think I'd be comfortable with negotiating with a Holocaust perpetrator, just like in a human context. I don't think I'd make that deal with a Nazi.
Well, let's say not negotiating means the 100 die. And it's fine to stick with that, because I do when it comes to the trolley car. It's going towards the 5 and I can switch it over to the 1. I let it kill the 5. But are you saying you would let it kill the 100 cows?
Yeah. I don't think I would negotiate with somebody like that. Same with the Nazi. If a Nazi was giving me a similar ultimatum like that, I would just choose the third option and kill him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. I don't want cows to die.
Yeah, so I think we can kind of wrap things up. Honestly, I think the only reason you have these positions that Joey is, being extreme when it comes to his activism is just because you trivialize animal lives. I just can't see you saying the same thing if Joey was sitting across the table from somebody like Himmler or, serial killer who's killing and eating people, and they just plain and flatly stated to Joey, I'm not going to go vegan, plain and simple. I'm just never going to do it. And then Joey gets angry and starts, berating the person, saying they're terrible, they're committing this. I don't think you have the same thing to say to Joey, saying he's an extremist.
If I am right, if him doing that brings more harm to Jews in this case, or people or animals, well, then it must be the right thing to do. It would mean his emotions got in the way of what was right. Now, not what was right as the actual right, but what was right to say as a person that cares.
Like, again, they're telling you.
So I think they're kind of back to talking about the principle versus pragmatically what might be most effective in the long run. And pundit, that's a very spiritually astute comment there. Living in the moment, it's difficult. It's sometimes very painful, but very necessary too.
Plainly that they don't have an interest in going vegan. So if like the most objective thing we can go on is their word, then I don't see how that would make a difference for one thing. And secondly, I don't know how it creates a stronger moral impetus to say, okay, well, could you like maybe reduce the amount of animals or people you're killing? Like, again, you're trivializing their lives versus trying your best to get the point across that all of these lives matter, and you should do everything you can to avoid killing them.
But you're talking to people that also trivialize their lives, so you got to meet them.
Well, I don't think they trivialize their lives.
They trivialize the animals' lives. Yeah, and so you kind of have to come to their level. But yes, you had asked this question before, and I didn't get around to answering it because then another question came up. But the reason I think it's best to do it, and again, this is all speculation. I'm just honestly trying to do what's best for the animals. But the reason you want to do it is because somebody that's willing to reduce and goes like, you know what, I think I need this meat for health, but I don't think I need so much. I don't need the unhealthy stuff, so I'm not going to eat chicken nuggets and hot dogs, but I'm willing to reduce. That person, if they truly are going to do that, then their mind, the wheels are turning. Maybe the next week, they're going to go, oh man, it's cool I'm doing this thing because now that I'm doing it and I think of these animals, like I'm actually saving animals. I heard from this reasonable vegan guy that because of me cutting it in half, only 100 animals died instead of 200. And he might.
So Carson's talking about the foot in the door technique, which there is empirical evidence suggesting that the foot in the door technique can be effective in getting people to change their behavior. So I definitely think there is some merit to that idea. But yeah, it seems like Vegan Gains is kind of sticking hard to the kind of like abolitionist position here, which I don't see why, they're not compatible. I think you can add, and I'm not saying that Vegan Gains is claiming that they're not compatible, but just kind of as a side note, I think you can strive for abolition and also get a foot in the door in terms of getting someone who lives carnistically to adopt certain abolitionist perspectives rather than just like kind of like blanketedly getting them to reduce their consumption of all this stuff. Another thing that I want to say to Carson's point is that I think there can be cases where a person has reduced their animal product, quote unquote, intake sufficiently where they don't really feel a strong enough motivation to continue defending the consumption of animal flesh and secretions because there's not as much prospective cognitive dissonance in just the cessation of that behavior. Vegan Pundit says, would Carson view them as less worthy of the life and rights? I'm not sure what exactly Vegan Pundit's referring to there, but might be something to ask Carson if you could formulate as a question for Carson sometime on one of his streams when he's taking questions and stuff. Contrarian 420 says, this recurring conflating of the one-to-one value of human and animal lives with the Holocaust is a bit hyperbolic and disingenuous. I would say, for that matter, I would say the whole like, I can't tell you how many discussions I've heard where it's on Discord, especially where it's just like, well, what's the difference between human and animal? And of course, they mean non-human animal. And it's just like, I don't know. Is like, I'm just like, really? Like, is that really where we are? But I mean, I don't know. I also maybe see that as kind of a necessary evil to some extent because we're talking with people who do afford moral consideration to humans. So I think there needs to be some aspect of that, but I really think we need to be more creative and transformative because so many times we just get taken for a ride where people are just like, they'll be like, oh, can a baboon make a skyscraper or something like that? Or like, when's the last time you saw a cat win a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that? And it just ends up being this kind of like devil on your shoulder trying to pull you into human supremacy and exceptionalism. And kind of like, the vegan will just constantly attempt to get this logical consistency. And it ends up kind of like being a very tangential conversation where one person's feet are just pointed in a different direction. So I think there needs to be a little bit more creativity when we are bringing up. I think we need to be really good at sizing up carnist arguments and then giving them, if they're in debate mode and we're going to take the bait, so to speak. I think we need to be in a mindset where we're ready to reductio them and not make it so simple as like the animal versus human discussion. Not to say that Reasonable Vegan and Vegan Gains have been overtly simple or anything like in their analogies to the detriment of intellectual discourse and honesty, but it's just something I've observed, like per all the conversations I've heard, especially on Discord. Contrarian says, you can simply discuss whether there is value difference or not without a priori pinning the Holocaust to the side that disagrees with your one-to-one valuation. Yeah, I think that's a fair point, but I think that it is important to keep non-vegans accountable and bring up the fact that there is an animal holocaust going on, and that the position which morally devalues non-human animals is conducive to the perpetuation and contribution toward the animal holocaust. All right, looks like they're about to wrap up here, so don't have too much more time left.
Might feel off about that, and then after a couple more weeks, especially if I keep in touch with this person, then they might be like, you know what, I'm going to cut dairy out because I didn't know about the taking the calves away and the forcefully impregnating, and it leads to change.
And I think didn't mean to cut Vegan Gains off there, but I think if you had heard earlier what I was saying, I think Carson makes a good he has a good perspective here, in that I think if you're if there's somebody in your life who you see every day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think there may be some good rationale for taking a slower, softer approach, and not like totally, for the lack of a better word, kind of alienating them from listening to you. But there's a way to take a soft approach that doesn't condone unnecessary violence toward animals. So I think it's a difficult line to walk. But I think a lot of these, I think Carson, hopefully when I believe he's going to start doing street discussions soon. I think when he starts doing street discussions, he'll kind of gain a perspective that maybe Vegan Gains is, coming from having done street outreach.
You're talking to somebody who's thinking like that to begin with, where, oh, well, I feel like, I like the idea of killing less animals and I don't even need to eat that much anyway. Why don't you just push them that little bit further in the conversation and say, if you feel good about lowering your animal deaths, why don't you just bring it to zero? Wouldn't you feel fantastic?
Yeah, no, I think it is best to either get to that level but not push it too hard, or start with that level. Like Earthling Ed, I think he's one of the best at it, but he goes too far because I think he starts off great talking about what we should do, the ultimate vegan message. But when people are receptive to him and really enjoy what he's saying and they think about it and they want to reduce and cut down, I think it's a good point. As soon as they are pointing out, I'm not ever going to stop eating meat, I was raised on it, I love it, but I'm thinking about whatever. Like at that point, I think the right thing to do for animals would be to encourage that and to get that person walking away thinking vegans are pretty cool. And
okay, so I disagree vehemently with what Carson just espoused. I think that you should always advocate for what you would like to see happen. And if I tell somebody you shouldn't eat animals, blah blah blah, like obviously if I just say something very simplistically and didactically to them, they're not really going to adopt my position or take it seriously. But if I have a thought out conversation with them from the perspective of asking questions, like an epistemological kind of conversation, why do you see animals this way? Talk a little bit about speciesism, talk a little bit about a plant-based diet, talk a little bit about how they can still be healthy on it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and how it's a form of discrimination, and try to get them to see these non-human animals as legitimate victims. I think that they're going to walk away, even if I did advocate for a strictly plant-based diet. I think that, I would at least hope, and I mean, I'm not saying that the empirics of this are totally fuzzy and unknown, but I would at least hope that if they saw something on a shelf that could objectively be known to them to cause less animal suffering, and not saying that the humane welfare, whatever, all that stuff is, but I would hope that even if they didn't do exactly what I wanted them to do, that they'd be taking steps toward that direction. So I really don't see it as a good use of my time to tell them, well, okay, you're not going to stop eating meat. Well, at least go and get like the high welfare, humane certified, all that stuff. I feel like if I advocate for the rights of pigs to not be, gassed and have their throats slit, and that person adopts a somewhat vegan ideology in terms of seeing other creatures, namely pigs in this example, as morally worthy individuals, I think they're going to go toward that stuff naturally. Now, whether they should or they shouldn't, that's a whole nother topic, because I think that those things are definitely like, it's a big marketing play. And I think that the differences are actually very minimal when it comes to the actual welfare of these animals. And I think that it also perpetuates the problem that we're trying to stop in the first place. But all that aside, I think if somebody, let's just say, reduces their contribution to animal suffering by virtue of a person sending an abolitionist message, I think that's likely to happen, maybe even more likely to happen than if a vegan says, oh, go buy the high welfare stuff. Because if we say go buy the high welfare stuff, they're going to be like, okay, I can buy this low welfare stuff, or I can buy this high welfare stuff, like massive quotations around all these terms. They could buy one or the other. I'm not saying one is necessarily even better than the other necessarily, but anyway, I think we need to stick to the point of abolition and then encourage people to go toward that direction, whatever that may look like. It may look like something different in each individual case, but I don't think that we should say, oh, this person pushed back too hard on my abolitionist stance, and therefore I'm going to soften my stance and tell them something different. And the reality is, if you're out on the street with a sign or showing slaughterhouse footage and things like that, I mean, you would end up being very inconsistent in your advocacy also. Hopefully some of the things I'm saying right now are going to resonate more with Carson in the future. That is my hope. Let me read this comment from Lewis. Lewis says, animal rights activist is promoting a contradiction to their own position by promoting welfareism. Yeah, well said. I agree. Lewis says, it's a very different thing if a butcher of CAFO or CAFO operator to push welfareism. It's a very different thing if a butcher or CAFO operator push welfareism. Yeah, and I think if I understand correctly, what I tend to see oftentimes happening is that these organizations that are responsible for animal welfare, like ASPCA type organizations, will kind of like certify and sign off on these things. So like the butcher or the CAFO operator is kind of like working in tandem with these places who are certifying these things. So it kind of ends up becoming a really convoluted situation. And of course, I think reinforcing the property status of non-human animals.
And having that extra push of just hammering, I just don't think is ultimately good for animals in the long run, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, generally, this is a problem for all forms of activism, trans rights activism, gay activism, black rights, you name it. What tends to happen is the group that is the group that are the ones perpetrating.
Lewis says, if a CAFO operator push welfareism, it's not contradictory. Yeah. And I think it should be kind of acknowledged that companies will do things that are in their financial best interest. So if they're pushing welfareism, you can bet that they expect to be able to make more money by getting their stuff in, different grocery stores known for higher welfare kind of things. Lewis says, but if an animal rights activist pushes welfareism, it's contradictory. Yep. Yeah, I got you. I agree completely. Let me get back onto this topic.
Violence of some sort against that group are the ones telling you, why do you have to do activism in that way? Like, if you just weren't so out loud and proud of it.
Yeah, so I think Vegan Gains is saying, like, why should activists take advice from the very people who were trying to talk out of hurting these animals in this basic this hostage negotiation situation, basically saying I think he's saying if they're not even convinced of it, then why should we take advice from him? And I agree wholeheartedly. I think once you've done enough outreach, you talk to so many people who tell you, well, I don't think that this is the best approach, or I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say like something about the vegan teacher and how she supposedly pushed them away from considering veganism, but like there they were in a vegan Discord server because they wanted to talk to some vegans about what the vegan teacher said. And lo and behold, a lot of those people, I mean, more people than I can count on a single hand, at least in a short amount of time, I've seen go vegan. So it's definitely something that can happen where, there's a thing called the radical flank effect, where even if somebody is, let's say, promoting a message in a very extreme way, what it can end up doing is it can end up pushing the success of the quote unquote moderates.
They always try to control the message because they don't like any opposition. And when you do things like that, like people do this with vegans too, when you have somebody plainly stating that they have no intention of going vegan, they're just never going to do it. And then they play this game with you after you say, so you're like in favor of Holocaust, like, oh, well, you know what? Like if you weren't so extreme, they already told you they had no interest. Well, here's the bullshit. It's a tactic to control what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think something that you could do if someone tells you like, oh, I don't like how you're approaching this message, or, oh, I agree with your cause, but I don't agree with your tactics. Ask them how you would want to be, ask them, how would you want to be persuaded? Like, that's what you should ask them. And then, or like, what would you want me to say? Or what could I say to persuade you to go vegan? And then once they tell you that, or tell them, like, whatever this magical sentence is that you believe I should say, if I were to say that to you, would you actually go vegan? And their answer would be like, no, because I love bacon too much, or something like that. So it's completely disingenuous. Vegan Gains is 100% correct here, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, so here's the difference. Let's imagine about half the carnists we're going to be talking to are like JD Garland from Garland Farms, where they're just anti-vegans, and then the other half are people that might eventually get there. The fact that there's so many JD Garlands out there that they're just trying to destroy veganism doesn't mean that we shouldn't assume most people are like the other ones I'm talking about. Because yes, anybody that's just, I hate veganism, veganism's the worst, we're not gonna win those people over no matter what. So what we say to them doesn't mean anything. But we never want to accidentally push away somebody that was possibly going to be a soon to be vegan. And that's my concern. But I mean, I've gone back and forth over the past.
Yeah, I would say as far as street outreach is concerned, if you are outreaching on the street and a person who comes across your demonstration is clearly not interested in going vegan and all they want to do is debate, I would say don't waste any time on them unless you're trying to make like, clickbait kind of like, high view count kind of like debate content. I would say don't waste your time. There's so many people out there who just need to be told about what's actually happening to these animals. There are so many people who just need to see the footage for that final push that we really don't need to be spending time in these long dialogues if a person comes across a demonstration and they're clearly not interested in going vegan and would clearly never consider it.
Yeah, I would just add, the Nigerian scammers actually use this as a technique. And what they'll do is they'll actually, when they do make scams, especially internet scams like through email lists, they will make it obvious that it's a scam. So what that does is it weeds out people who wouldn't fall for the scam anyway. They'll just waste your time and be like, oh, yeah, sure, just send me the account. Oh, I can't find it, did I? And they just want to fuck with you. So it weeds out all the smarter people, and then you're just left with idiots who will actually fall for it. So I think with vegan activism, it can be a similar circumstance where, look, if people are ethically minded, like they care about animal rights, they care about suffering, death, things like that, they're not going to be the type of people who are dissuaded by a vegan saying, okay, well, you're supporting a Holocaust. Like, don't you feel bad like that you're like literally perpetrating horrible atrocities? Like,
yeah, Vegan Gains brings up a good point in that, if people approach your demonstration with a listening ear, they are likely interested in the issue and are someone that we could talk to and persuade. We don't need to get ourselves really, really pressurized and think about converting people. We can just think about it like, this person is interested in this issue. I just need to convince them to have a desire to do this non-action and implement the change that's required to go vegan. It's not a really high pressure situation when you've already kind of pre-screened people. And that's, if you listen to what AV organizers say, they say, we don't approach people, we let people come up to us. It's part of the protocol to let them, stand in front of the screen for a little bit, let them watch the footage, and then kind of like, in a friendly way, kind of come up to them and, make the case for animal rights in the form of veganism. So yeah, the pre-screening process, I think, is spectacular. It just so happens to be the case that we're not going to be able to convince everybody, but there are a great deal of people who are just starving for the vegan message.
Why are you saying you'd never go vegan? Like if they're a bit aggressive like that and really trying to bring across this moral impetus that you are doing something terrible, the type of person that would go vegan who's interested in ethics isn't going to be somebody who's dissuaded by an interaction that's a little bit aggressive with a vegan. So I'm not convinced that you're going to have a situation where, oh, but you could be turning somebody off. It's just not going to happen, right?
And I think it's worth noting that I think like one of the common things that we all have among us as vegans is that we don't want to be hypocrites. We don't want to say that we care about animals and then contradict that with our behavior, because it's hard to live that way. And I think Vegan Gains makes a great point in that if there's somebody who's like a true vegan, true black heart vegan, they're not going to be dissuaded by a person being a little bit aggressive and pushing that message. And they may even be thankful for it. I know that I certainly, I can say without a doubt that in my pre-vegan days, I would have been very thankful if somebody had been more firm with me.
Yeah, because like it's different than a religious movement where it's entirely based on woo-woo bullshit. You have to kind of sucker people in with, oh, like we're all nice. It's this nice community. We all get to hang out and eat fucking pita bread later. That sort of thing requires very positive interactions because there's no logical basis behind it. Why are you worshiping this god going to this church over another? There's not really any reason. With veganism, like again, it's a logical extension of human rights. It's something that you can kind of logically come to the conclusion of if you even just value your own rights, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something that's going to be so easily, you're not going to be able to put somebody off so easily for life if they have a bad interaction with a vegan.
Well, it's just such a big change in somebody's life. So I'm with you. I mean, I convinced myself to go vegan before I even knew what it was. I just started pondering it one day, and then I found out it was a thing. So everybody's brain works slightly different. The problem is what stands between what we have now and veganism is people thinking about things and changing. I don't know what number that is. It might be a thing where it's going to be like 25% or something, and then the rest just does a snowball effect. But there are a set amount of people in the world today that eat animal products that, with the right conversations with them, they are going to be the ones that change. But they grew up eating meat, dairy, and eggs, and it's so much a part of their lives that they would rather think, oh, this must be an acceptable thing because everybody does it. It would be way too hard for me to cut it out. So I'd rather just assume the whole movement is pointless. Where if we got those people to start thinking about it in details, being anti-fur but still eating meat, and being anti-SeaWorld, and then slowly but surely these changes, I think will change.
I think it's that's already where we are right now. I think the majority of people who like still eat animals and grew up eating animals, etc., are opposed to fur. Like, you know, I think that's already where we are right now. They're already opposed to factory farming. They're already opposed to animal abuse, like quote unquote. Their actions just don't reflect that. So I think in holding them accountable, we need to confront them with hard truths. Jeremy asked Lewis, is it contradictory if a women's rights activist supports funding more shelters for battered women? So they're having a little bit of a abolition versus welfarist discussion there. Something that, again, like Carson and I are going to be talking about this on Monday. So don't want to spend too much time on it here, but I've already spent a lot of time on it anyway, so I might as well. Lewis says, one of the many problems with arguing about welfare reform is that there's almost always going to be an endless disagreement about what constitutes kind or abuse with abolition. It's basically a dichotomy. Yeah. Yeah. And I understand the allure of welfarism. But again, I think when I don't want to build my whole case up against it here. I kind of want to at least give you guys something to look forward to. But yeah, I understand the allure of it nevertheless. All right, let's continue with the video. I think this is almost done here, and then I got to get going.
But I don't think I'm necessarily, you know, I don't think mine must be right. I just think that it's probably the best route to go. But
yeah, I think what's really going to make the world vegan is just technological changes ultimately, like lab grown meat and stuff. But yeah, I think when you're talking about situations like that where you have somebody who's against SeaWorld but still eats meat, you know, you're kind of average person. I think the best thing for them is to just have, you know, good discussions with vegans who have a decent grasp on philosophy.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's going to help technology-wise is AI. I mean, I've had discussions with AI bots where I've asked them questions about justifications for not being vegan, and it seems like AI is very pro-vegan for what it's worth.
And have good arguments for veganism, and really make arguments for veganism and not like this idea for welfarism. Because again, it's my belief that if you argue for welfarism and, you know, you pat somebody on the back for killing like 50% less animals, you're just trivializing their lives. And that's the exact opposite of what you want.
I think Vegan Gains, maybe he meant to say reducitarianism in that sense. They are different topics, but I still understand his point nevertheless.
Well, one thing that the only way we could even kind of know, I mean, we can't know, but would be to look at vegans when they turn vegan. Like we now know that we wouldn't ever want to harm an animal, but what about that transition period of when we were deciding to go vegan and I don't know about you, but went vegetarian, we're like kind of flexitarian for a month and like eased our way into it. I think that's a good idea of showing you what others might be like when they hear about the vegan message. So
yeah, like I will say this, different methods of activism are going to work better for different people. What turned me vegan was Gary Yourofsky's speech.
Cool.
And he certainly doesn't promote welfarism at all in any of his activism. And I'm not somebody who cares so much about being treated well in a conversation. If somebody I only ever really focus on the strength of the argument. So Gary being aggressive or whatever, calling animal eaters like pieces of shit, it doesn't, like, that wouldn't make me turn something off and not listen and go the other way. So I will say, like, and I'm feeling like we're kind of at the end of the discussion, what you're doing isn't necessarily wrong in all cases, because yeah, there are some people who kind of need to be gently wiggled into things, and there are people who kind of need to be hit with hard facts and be told to fuck you. And it
yeah, I think Richard's bringing up a great point here in that different types of approaches work better for different people. I will say that if you don't send the ethical message and get it, you know, if the person doesn't take it home, so to speak, in their mind, it doesn't sink in, they are more likely to be part of the you know, recidivism numbers and end up kind of like quote unquote going back. And then you end up with people saying they're ex-vegan when they weren't really vegan in the first place, because, you know, in some cases, all somebody did is actually just advocate for a plant-based diet or advocate for welfarism. So reducitarianism, things like that, where a person doesn't internalize the abolitionist message and then ends up, you know, being ex-vegan, and then you have to deal with all the shitfall from that.
Kind of sticks in their head and they keep thinking about it. And there are people who are just kind of vibe with more aggressive voices, and people who vibe with more friendly, voices, right? So, yeah.
Sure. Cool, man. Well, that's a great talk. I'm glad we had
sure.
it. I don't know how often you're up for having discussions, debates, but I have another channel where I talk about.
Okay, cool. So thanks for everybody who stuck around. It's been almost 3 hours. Even if you didn't stick around, thanks for watching or whatever. This was the first time I'd ever done like a live video reaction or live stream by myself. So it was definitely a new experience for me. I can definitely check something off my mental checklist of experiences that are mildly terrifying at first, but it was fun, and appreciate everybody watching. Just maybe a little bit of housekeeping. Like I said, I'm going to be having a discussion with Carson hopefully on Monday about welfarism and about abolitionism and the definition of veganism too, because I think he's working on some kind of definition. And then I have a discussion with Akash, I believe, on Thursday. I have some like Cuba Truth and like other kind of like organic outreach kind of stuff that I plan on posting in the near future. A lot of older stuff. I have a lot of older content that I'm not really sure if I should post or not, because I feel like my outreach has just gotten better, and I don't know if how much of a benefit that would have for people to see those conversations. But there's also that. And then I have a video coming out about the plant-based dog food that I've been making for the dogs that my partner and I are raising together. And then another video I'm going to make coming up soon about reducitarianism specifically, and why I'm not in favor of advocating from a reducitarian perspective. So those are all little things in the works. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching, and hope you got something beneficial out of seeing me watch and react to this. I never really kind of understood the whole reaction video thing, but it's always nice to be able to at least kind of like hold space for a forum where people can come and chat about the ideas that they hear, and kind of meanwhile like watch the video themselves and things like that. So I might be doing some stuff like this in the future. If you want to see me do more stuff like this, please do go ahead and comment that. I've thought about doing reactions to like ex-vegan videos and stuff like that, but I don't know. It was just an idea. I'm not sure how well received that would be. I might end up getting even more hate comments than I already do by pushing a vegan abolitionist message. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate your time that you spent here. Thanks Vegan Called Quest for watching as well. Good to see your comment there. And thanks Lewis and Pundin and everyone else who is still around here. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and rock the vegan life. And hopefully I'll see you guys around. All right, take care. Bye.